Texas, 1885. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the vast desert landscape in shades of amber and gold. Nathan Hawkins knelt beside the body of a man who would never see another sunset. The rope that had suspended him from the gnarled branch of a solitary oak still coiled around his neck like a dead snake. Nathan had cut him down too late. He didn't know the man's name, just another victim of frontier justice or injustice. The man's crime could have been anything from horse theft to simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Out here, the difference hardly mattered. Nathan gently closed the man's bulging eyes. No one deserved to die like this alone, under the merciless sun, feet kicking at empty air until the life drained away. He'd seen too much death in his 45 years, carried too many ghosts already. One more wouldn't make much difference. As he stood brushing dust from his worn leather coat, the distant crack of gunfire split the evening silence. Nathan's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip, his body tensing with the practiced alertness of a man who had survived by reading the desert's subtle warnings. He squinted toward the horizon where a cloud of dust was rising, backlit by the setting sun. At first, it appeared to be a single rider pushing hard across the flat terrain. But as the dust cloud drew closer, Nathan could make out more shapes behind. 3, maybe 4 riders in pursuit. The lead figure stumbled into view. Not a rider at all, but a woman on foot. Even at this distance, Nathan could see her dress was once white, now torn and stained with dirt and what looked like blood. Her hands were bound before her, and she ran with the desperate, faltering pace of someone beyond exhaustion. Behind her, the riders were gaining ground, with each passing second, their whoops and calls carrying across the desert like coyote cries. Nathan Hawkins faced a choice clear as the line between earth and sky. He could mount his horse and ride away, avoid getting tangled in whatever trouble was headed his way. The smart play, the one that had kept him alive this long. Or he could stay. The decision should have been simple. He'd sworn years ago never to involve himself in other people's problems unless there was money in it. Yet he didn't move toward his horse. Instead, he watched the woman's desperate flight, something long dormant stirring beneath his ribs. She felt her bound hands, unable to break her fall. Even as she struggled to her feet, the riders closed in, dust billowing around them like smoke. Nathan found himself stepping away from the hanging tree, moving to stand between the approaching group and his tethered horse. His thumb brushed over the worn grip of his Colt. The familiar sensation anchored him as he raised the weapon and fired 2 shots into the air. The sharp reports echoed across the desert. The riders pulled their mounts to a halt about 30 yards from where Nathan stood, hand-steady revolver now aimed squarely at the lead rider. "That's far enough," Nathan called, his voice rough from disuse. The woman had collapsed to her knees, chest heaving, head bowed with exhaustion. She didn't look up, as though she had nothing left for hope. The lead rider nudged his horse forward a few steps. He was a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and cold eyes. A silver star gleamed on his vest. Not an official badge, but something similar, the kind worn by private security forces. "This is none of your business, stranger," the man said, his voice carrying an edge of authority. "We're apprehending a fugitive. Step aside." Nathan didn't move. "Funny. Don't see any real lawmen here. Name's Reed Wagner." The man gestured to the emblem on his chest. "Special security for the Western Rail Company. That woman is wanted for theft and murder." Nathan studied the woman. She remained on her knees, her dark hair falling forward to obscure her face. Her shoulders shook with each labored breath. She looked about as dangerous as a wounded sparrow. "That's so," Nathan said, voice flat with disbelief. "Must have been a mighty small gun she used with her hands tied like that." Wagner's face hardened. "You're interfering with company business. I'd advise you to—" "I'm afraid you've got it wrong," Nathan interrupted, reaching slowly into his coat with his free hand. He pulled out an old tarnished badge, a memento from another life. "Nathan Hawkins, formerly of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, currently hunting a bounty." He nodded toward the woman. "This one's my quarry. Been tracking her for 2 weeks." Wagner's eyes narrowed. "You got papers to prove that claim?" "Back with my gear." Nathan's expression remained impassive. "But I'm not inclined to show them to anyone but a real sheriff. No offense to your company position." A tense silence stretched between them. Wagner studied Nathan, taking in the weathered face, the scar that ran from temple to jaw, the steady hand holding the Colt. The eyes that had seen too much and given away nothing. "Well now," Wagner finally said, a cold smile appearing beneath his mustache. "If she's your bounty, then you've saved us some trouble. We'll just take her off your hands. The company's offering a handsome reward." "Appreciate the offer," Nathan replied, not lowering his gun. "But I've got a contract to deliver her to Tucson, alive and in one piece." Client was very specific about that part. One of the other riders spat into the dust. She belongs to the organization. We got rights to her. Nathan's eyes flicked briefly to the man who'd spoken, then back to Wagner. Something cold settled in his stomach at the words. The organization. He'd heard whispers of it during his Pinkerton days. Never enough to build a case, but enough to know it was something ugly. Way I see it, Nathan said, voice steady, my claim comes first. I'm willing to discuss compensation for your troubles, but the woman comes with me. Wagner studied him for a long moment. You're making a mistake, Hawkins. This territory's changing. Company men like us are the law now. Old-timers like you. You're just ghosts that haven't figured out you're dead yet. Nathan didn't respond, just kept his gun trained on Wagner's chest. Finally, Wagner tugged his horse's reins, turning the animal. We'll be seeing you again, Hawkins. Count on it. He looked at the woman still kneeling in the dust. She's marked. She belongs to us. As they rode away, their forms gradually dissolving into the gathering darkness, Nathan kept his gun raised until they were mere specks on the horizon. Only then did he holster the weapon and approach the woman. She flinched as his shadow fell across her, but didn't look up. They're gone, he said, simply kneeling beside her. For now. When she raised her head, Nathan saw a face streaked with dirt and tears, but with eyes that still held a spark of defiance. She couldn't have been more than 25, though the ordeal she'd endured had etched temporary lines around her eyes and mouth. Why? She whispered, her voice cracked and dry. Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a knife from his boot and carefully cut the ropes binding her wrists. The skin beneath was raw and bloody, where the rough hemp had chafed her flesh to the bone. He offered his canteen. Small sips, he advised as she grabbed it with trembling hands. She drank cautiously, then more greedily, as the water revived her. When she finally lowered the canteen, she studied him with wary eyes. You're not really a bounty hunter, are you? A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. Not usually. Today seemed like a good day to try it out. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. As he did, something fell from the folds of her tattered dress, a small photograph worn at the edges. Nathan picked it up before the desert breeze could claim it. It showed a family, a stern-faced man with a full beard, a gentle-looking woman, and between them a young girl of perhaps 10. Nathan turned it over. Written on the back in a careful hand were the words, "Elizabeth, find us in Green Valley." He offered it to her, but as she reached for it, he caught sight of something on her neck, a brand raw and recent in the shape of a W. Nathan had seen many cruel things in his life, but the sight of that mark burned into human flesh made his jaw tighten with a cold rage he thought he'd buried years ago. You got a name, he asked, handing her the photograph. She hesitated, clutching the photo to her chest. Charlotte, she finally said. Charlotte Morgan. Nathan nodded, not pressing further. Names out here could be as changeable as the wind. What mattered was that she was alive, and for reasons he didn't care to examine too closely, he intended to keep her that way. There's an old hunter's cabin about 2 miles east of here, he said. Not much, but it's got walls and a roof. We can rest there tonight. And then, Charlotte asked, wariness still evident in her stance. Nathan looked toward the horizon where Wagner and his men had disappeared. Then we figure out what to do about the people who want you dead. The cabin was little more than a single room with a dirt floor and a stone fireplace abandoned years ago, when its owner either moved on or met his end in the unforgiving wilderness. But it had 4 walls, a roof that kept out most of the elements, and a door that could be barred. Luxuries not to be taken lightly in this part of Texas. Nathan built a small fire while Charlotte sat wrapped in a spare blanket, her back against the wall. She hadn't spoken since they had arrived, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames as if they contained some message only she could read. The firelight cast her face in sharp relief, highlighting the hollows beneath her cheekbones and the dark circles under her eyes. But it also revealed what the harsh daylight had obscured, a natural beauty that hardship had failed to extinguish, and a determination that spoke of inner strength. You should eat something, Nathan said, offering her a strip of dried beef from his provisions. Charlotte accepted it with a nod of thanks but set it aside. Those men, she finally said, her voice steadier now, they'll come back, won't they? Nathan prodded the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. Eventually. You should have let me go with them. He looked up sharply. That what you wanted? Her laugh was brittle. Of course not, but now they'll hunt you too. Nathan returned to tending the fire. Been hunted before. Silence settled between them again, broken only by the crackling of flames and the distant howl of a coyote. Nathan didn't press her for details. People carried their stories like wounds. Some needed air to heal, others were best left covered. Why did you help me? Charlotte finally asked, studying him across the fire. Nathan considered the question. There were many answers he could give, none of them entirely true or entirely false. In the end, he settled for the simplest. Seemed like the right thing to do. She didn't look convinced. Most men out here don't trouble themselves with right things unless there's profit in it. Never claimed to be most men. Nathan reached for his saddlebag and pulled out a small medical kit. Let me see your wrists. Reluctantly, Charlotte extended her arms. The rope burns were ugly, some deep enough to scar if not properly treated. Nathan worked in silence, cleaning the wounds with water and whiskey, then applying a salve of his own making, a mixture of herbs and rendered fat that had saved his own skin more than once. As he wrapped clean cloth around her wrists, he noticed she was studying his face, particularly the long scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. Pinkerton, she said quietly. You weren't lying about that part. Nathan's hand stilled momentarily before continuing their work. No, that part was true. You're a long way from Chicago. Been a long time since Chicago. He finished bandaging her right wrist and moved to the left. How'd you know about Pinkerton? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I'm a journalist. Or I was. Boston Times. Nathan raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. A female journalist was unusual enough, but one who recognized a former Pinkerton man on sight was rarer still. Boston's even further than Chicago, he observed. Charlotte winced as he tightened the bandage on her left wrist. I was investigating disappearances along the new rail lines. Women mostly. Some children. Her voice grew harder. No one important enough for the authorities to care about. Nathan tied off the bandage and sat back. And you found something. It wasn't a question, but Charlotte nodded anyway. More than I was supposed to. She fell silent again, her gaze returning to the fire. Nathan didn't push. Whatever she'd discovered had nearly cost her life, and might still. She'd share when she was ready or she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't his business. Except that he'd made it his business the moment he'd stepped between her and Wagner. You should rest, he said, moving to the door to check the bar was secure. We'll move at first light. Where Charlotte asked a trace of her earlier wariness returning. Nathan looked out the cabin's single window at the desert night stars sharp as glass shards against the black sky. Somewhere safer than here. After Charlotte had fallen into an exhausted sleep, curled on a bedroll near the fire, Nathan sat with his back to the wall revolver across his knees. Sleep wouldn't come, not with Wagner's men likely still in the area. Instead, he found himself studying the sleeping woman, wondering what secrets she carried that were worth hunting her across the desert. Journalists had a knack for finding trouble, but the brand on her neck spoke of something beyond ordinary retribution. She'd tucked the photograph under her makeshift pillow, but a corner was still visible. Green Valley. The name stirred something in Nathan's memory, a settlement mentioned in reports during his Pinkerton days, though he couldn't recall the context. Moving quietly so as not to wake her, Nathan reached for Charlotte's dress, which he'd hung near the fire to dry, after brushing off the worst of the dust. He'd noticed something in one of the pockets earlier, but hadn't wanted to pry while she was awake. His fingers found what he was looking for, a small, leather-bound notebook, its cover worn smooth with use. Most of the pages had been torn out, leaving only a few entries at the back. The handwriting was neat and precise, the mark of someone educated April 15, 1885. I've confirmed the connection between the Western Rail Company and the disappearances. The security force they have established is nothing but a front for something they call the organization. Wagner leads the operations in this region, but he answers to someone higher. The women aren't just being taken for the usual reasons. There's something more sinister at work. April 18, 1885, followed one of Wagner's men to an abandoned mine 10 miles north of Riverton. Heard screams. God help me, I heard screams. When the wagons left, I counted 3 bodies wrapped in canvas. They're experimenting on them somehow. Need more evidence before sending dispatch to Boston. The next several pages had been torn out, leaving only the final entry. May 2nd, 1885. P.O. has betrayed me, I'm certain of it. I think he's been working for Wagner all along. If I don't make it to Green Valley, seek out Nathan Hawkins, the only man who ever brought Wagner to court and lived to tell about it. Nathan stared at his own name on the page, a cold sensation spreading through his chest. How did she know him, and how did she know about the Wagner case? He closed the journal, his mind racing back 5 years to the courtroom in Austin. Reed Wagner charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, extortion, and murder. Nathan had spent months building the case, tracking victims, gathering testimony. And then, on the day of the trial, their star witness had vanished. Without her testimony, the case had collapsed. Wagner had walked free, smiling as he passed Nathan in the corridor. A month later, Catherine had fallen ill. The doctors had called it consumption, a swift and merciless strain that took her in less than a week. Nathan had always suspected Wagner's hand in it, but could never prove it. He looked at Charlotte sleeping fitfully by the fire. What had she uncovered that was worth risking her life for? And more importantly, how was it connected to a case? 5 years cold. Nathan slipped the journal back into the pocket of her dress. Whatever answers Charlotte Morgan held, they would have to wait until morning. For now, all that mattered was keeping her alive long enough to share them. Dawn broke over the desert in a wash of pale gold. Nathan had dozed only briefly, jerking awake at every sound. Now he watched as Charlotte stirred her face momentarily peaceful before memory returned and her features tightened. She sat up quickly, eyes darting around the cabin until they settled on Nathan by the door. "You're still here," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Where else would I be?" Nathan rose, stretching muscles stiff from the night's vigil. Charlotte didn't answer. Instead, she reached under her makeshift pillow, tension easing from her shoulders only when her fingers found the photograph. "We should move soon," Nathan said, checking his revolver before holstering it. Wagner's men could be anywhere. Charlotte pushed herself to her feet, wincing as she put weight on blistered feet. "Where are we going?" Nathan handed her a strip of dried beef in the canteen. "You tell me. That photo, Green Valley, mean anything to you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It's where my father sent me to find him if I was ever in trouble." "Your father?" Nathan glanced at the photograph she still clutched. "The man in the picture?" "Yes, James Morgan." She looked down at the image. "This was taken before my mother disappeared. I was 10. Nathan busied himself packing his few belongings, giving her the privacy to compose herself. "Green Valley's not on any map I know." "It wouldn't be." Charlotte's voice grew stronger as she ate. "It's a settlement of refugees, I suppose you'd call them. People who've run afoul of the railroad companies or the mining operations. People who know too much." "Like you," Nathan observed. Charlotte met his gaze steadily. "Like me." Nathan shouldered his pack. "You know how to find this place." "I have directions. It's in the mountains about 2 days' ride north of here." She hesitated. "Mr. Hawkins." "Nathan." "Nathan," she amended. "You don't have to come with me. You've already done more than most would." He studied her for a moment. She'd washed her face with water from the canteen, and in the clear morning light, he could see the determination beneath the exhaustion. This was not a woman accustomed to asking for help, nor one who expected it to be given. "Got nowhere pressing to be," he said finally, "and Wagner's not the sort to forget a face." Relief flickered briefly in her eyes before she masked it. "I can pay you when we reach Green Valley." Nathan shook his head. "Not about money." "Then what is it about?" He didn't answer immediately, checking the cabin one last time to ensure they'd left no obvious signs of their presence. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Wagner and I have unfinished business." Charlotte seemed about to press further but thought better of it. Instead, she nodded. "Then we should go. The sooner we reach Green Valley, the better." They left the cabin as the sun cleared the horizon, Nathan leading his horse with Charlotte mounted. Her feet were too blistered to walk, and though she'd protested at first, she'd eventually accepted the necessity. As they moved across the desert, Nathan kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. Wagner wouldn't give up so easily on a prize he considered his property. The brand on Charlotte's neck was proof enough of that. The question that nagged at Nathan was why. What made this woman so valuable that Wagner would mark her rather than simply kill her? The answer, he suspected, lay in the torn-out pages of her journal, and in whatever connection existed between a Boston journalist and a case 5 years cold. They traveled through the heat of the day, stopping only when the sun was directly overhead to rest in the meager shade of a rocky outcropping. Charlotte had been quiet for most of the journey, lost in her own thoughts or simply conserving energy. Now, as they shared the last of Nathan's jerky, she broke the silence. "You read my journal last night." It wasn't a question. Nathan didn't bother denying it. "Yes." "Then you know they're experimenting on people. Women mostly." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I saw it, documented it before they caught me." "What kind of experiments?" Nathan asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Charlotte wrapped her arms around herself as if suddenly cold, despite the desert heat. "Medical, I think, though that hardly seems the right word for it. They're testing drugs, poisons maybe. I saw," she swallowed hard, "I saw a woman convulse until her spine snapped. They took notes, like it was nothing more than a laboratory demonstration." Nathan's expression didn't change, but something cold and hard settled in his chest. "And Wagner runs this operation, too. He oversees it, but he answers to someone higher up, someone they call the commander." Charlotte looked directly at him. "In my journal, I mentioned you brought Wagner to court once. What happened?" Nathan stared out at the shimmering desert. 5 years ago, I was working a case for Pinkerton, disappearances along the Texas-Mexico border. Trail led to Wagner and his security operation. Built a case, found witnesses." His jaw tightened. "Key witness disappeared the night before the trial." Without her testimony, Wagner walked free. And you left Pinkerton after that? Not immediately. Nathan's hand unconsciously went to the scar on his face. A month later, my wife fell ill. Doctors called it consumption, but it came on too fast, hit too hard. She was gone in a week. Understanding dawned in Charlotte's eyes. You think Wagner poisoned her? No, he did, Nathan corrected. Just could never prove it. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, she finally said. Nathan nodded once acknowledgement rather than acceptance. Some wounds never truly healed. You just learned to live with them. In your journal, he said, changing the subject, you mentioned someone betrayed you. Someone named P. Charlotte's expression hardened. Thomas Parker, former Pinkerton like you. He approached me in Boston, said he was investigating the same disappearances independently, offered to share information resources. Her laugh was bitter. I believed him. By the time I realized he was feeding information to Wagner, it was too late. Nathan's mind raced. Thomas Parker. The name hit like a physical blow. They'd worked together at Pinkerton for years, been friends, or so Nathan had thought. Parker had been the one who found their key witness missing, who'd brought the news that had ultimately doomed their case. Parker, he said, his voice tight. Tall man, red hair, going gray, walks with a slight limp in his left leg. Charlotte nodded, surprise evident on her face. You know him? Knew him, Nathan corrected. We worked the Wagner case together at Pinkerton. Realization dawned in Charlotte's eyes. Then he was the one who possibly. Nathan's expression was grim. Can't prove it, not yet. The implications hung between them. If Parker had betrayed Charlotte to Wagner, he might well have betrayed their witness 5 years ago. And if he'd done that, Nathan pushed the thought away. Speculation wouldn't help them now. What mattered was getting Charlotte to safety, finding this Green Valley, and then what? The question nagged at him. Revenge, justice, the line between the two had blurred for him years ago. We should move, he said, standing. Still have a lot of ground to cover before nightfall. Charlotte rose, wincing as she put weight on her injured feet. Nathan, she said, stopping him as he turned toward the horse. If Parker is involved in this, and if he had something to do with your wife's death, I'm sorry I brought this back for you. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. There was genuine regret in her eyes, but beneath it a determination that reminded him painfully of Catherine. Some ghosts never really leave, he said finally. Best we can do is face them. He helped her onto the horse and they set off once more into the shimmering heat, the mountains that sheltered Green Valley still distant on the northern horizon. By sunset, they had made good progress, the desert gradually giving way to rocky foothills. They found shelter in a narrow canyon, the high walls providing protection from both the elements and unwanted eyes. As darkness fell, Nathan built a small, smokeless fire using dry brush that burned hot and fast with minimal light. Charlotte had grown stronger throughout the day, the food and water reviving her spirit if not entirely healing her body. How did you become a journalist? Nathan asked as they sat beside the fire, the first personal question he had ventured since they'd met. Charlotte looked surprised by his interest, but answered readily enough. My father sent me east to live with my aunt after my mother disappeared. He thought I'd be safer there. A sad smile touched her lips. He wanted me to become a proper lady, maybe marry a banker or a lawyer. Instead, I discovered I had a talent for asking uncomfortable questions. Seems to have led you to trouble. The best stories usually do. She hugged her knees to her chest. After my mother vanished, I became obsessed, I suppose, with finding missing people, or at least telling their stories, making sure they weren't forgotten. Nathan nodded, understanding better than he cared to admit. His own path after Catherine's death had been shaped by a similar obsession, though his had led to isolation rather than investigation. And your investigation led you to Wagner, he prompted. Charlotte's expression darkened. I was following reports of women disappearing along the new rail lines. Poor women mostly. Immigrants, prostitutes, widows, people society overlooks. I expected to find a trafficking operation. She shook her head. What I found was worse. They're not just selling these women. They're using them, experimenting on them. For what purpose? I'm not entirely sure. From what I could gather, they're developing drugs or poisons, testing their effects. Her voice grew quieter. I think they may be selling the results to both sides of the border. Weapons that don't look like weapons. Nathan remembered the speed with which Catherine had succumbed to her consumption, how the doctors had been baffled by its progression, how nothing they tried had slowed it. A cold certainty settled in his gut. How did they catch you? He asked. Charlotte stared into the fire. I was careless, or perhaps too careful. I'd been documenting everything, building a case to send back to my editor in Boston. Parker offered to help me get inside one of the facilities, an abandoned mine they'd converted. Said he had a contact who could get us in. Her laugh was hollow. The contact was Wagner himself. They were waiting for me. But they didn't kill you. She touched the brand on her neck, the motion seemingly unconscious. No, Wagner said I was special stock, that the commander would want to meet me personally. A shudder ran through her. They kept me in a cage for 3 days. I saw what they did to the others, heard their screams. Nathan didn't press for details. The haunted look in her eyes told him enough. How did you escape? One of the guards was careless, left a tool within reach. Her expression hardened. I used it on him first, then on the lock. Nathan studied her with new respect. This woman had survived horrors that would have broken many. Yet here she sat, determined to continue her fight. It was both admirable and, he feared, potentially fatal. This Green Valley, he said, you're sure your father will be there? Charlotte's confidence wavered slightly. The last letter I received from him was over a year ago. He said if I ever needed to find him, to come to Green Valley. That it was a safe place for people who knew too much. People like him? She nodded. After my mother disappeared, he became obsessed with finding her. He was convinced the railroad companies were behind it, that they were taking people who opposed their expansion. Her voice softened. Everyone thought he'd gone mad with grief. Maybe he had, but what if he was right all along? Nathan considered this. If James Morgan had been investigating the same organization 15 years ago, it would explain why Charlotte had been marked rather than killed. Wagner might have recognized the connection, a way to draw out an old enemy. We'll find him, Nathan said with more certainty than he felt. But for now you should rest. I'll take first watch. Charlotte looked as if she might argue, but exhaustion won out. She curled up near the fire, using Nathan's rolled-up coat as a pillow. As her breathing deepened in sleep, Nathan sat with his back to the canyon wall, revolver across his knees, thoughts churning. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern, but one with significant gaps. Wagner, Parker, the disappearances, Catherine's death, and now Charlotte and her missing mother, all connected by invisible threads he couldn't quite grasp. One thing was becoming increasingly clear, however. Whatever Charlotte had stumbled upon was larger and more insidious than either of them had initially believed. And if Wagner was merely a lieutenant in this organization, then the true power behind it remained hidden and undoubtedly dangerous. Nathan stared up at the stars visible between the canyon walls, a familiar weight settling in his chest. He'd left that life behind, the investigations, the pursuit of justice, the constant dance with danger. Had built a simpler existence as a bounty hunter, taking only straightforward cases with clear objectives and minimal complications. Yet here he was, drawn back into the shadows by a woman with a journalist's curiosity and a survivor's determination. By a case that had cost him everything once before. As if sensing his thoughts, Charlotte stirred in her sleep, a small sound of distress escaping her lips. Nathan watched as her hand reached unconsciously for the photograph hidden in her clothing, seeking comfort from the family once whole. Despite his better judgment, Nathan made a silent promise to the sleeping woman. He would see her safely to Green Valley, help her find her father if he could. And then, only then, would he settle his account with Wagner and whoever stood behind him. It was a promise that would prove far more costly than he could imagine. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Nathan woke Charlotte. They had alternated watches through the night, though Nathan had slept only fitfully during his rest, too attuned to the dangers surrounding them. We need to move, he said, already packing their meager supplies. I heard riders passing in the night. Not close, but heading north like us. Charlotte was instantly alert, the survival instincts she'd developed during her captivity, evident in the way she quickly gathered her things and checked her surroundings. Wagner's men, she asked, her voice low. Most likely. They'll be watching the direct routes to the mountains. Nathan secured his bedroll to the saddle. We'll need to take a less obvious path. As they prepared to leave their shelter, Charlotte suddenly gripped Nathan's arm. I need to ask you something, she said, her expression serious. If they catch up to us, if it looks like they'll take me again, she took a deep breath. I need you to promise you won't let that happen. Nathan understood her meaning immediately. The brand on her neck and the haunted look in her eyes told him enough about what she'd endured and what awaited her if recaptured. It won't come to that, he said firmly, but if it does. Her grip tightened. Promise me. Nathan looked into her eyes and saw not fear, but a steely resolve. This was not a request born of cowardice, but of a clear-eyed assessment of the alternatives. I promise, he said quietly, but it won't come to that. Relief softened her features momentarily before determination reasserted itself. Thank you. They left the canyon as the first rays of sunlight began to touch the highest rocks, casting long shadows across the terrain. Nathan led them on a circuitous route, avoiding open ground when possible, using dry stream beds and rocky outcroppings for cover. The land grew rougher as they progressed, the desert gradually giving way to scrubland, dotted with juniper and stunted pine. The mountains loomed closer now, their lower slopes a patchwork of forest and meadow. By midday, they had reached a series of low hills that offered both concealment and a vantage point. Nathan left Charlotte with the horse in a sheltered hollow while he climbed to the highest point to survey their surroundings. What he saw confirmed his fears. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles back along their trail, a group of riders was visible. 5 or 6 men moving with purpose. Wagner had clearly called in reinforcements. As Nathan watched the riders split into 2 groups, one continuing along their trail, while the other veered east, apparently intending to circle around and cut off their path to the mountains. He returned quickly to where Charlotte waited, explaining the situation in terse sentences. "They're trying to flank us," he concluded. "We can't outrun them on a single horse, not with both of us." Charlotte's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "What do we do?" Nathan considered their options, none of them good. They could try to hide, but the sparse vegetation offered limited concealment. They could stand and fight, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Or they could split up, a tactic that might save one of them, but doom the other. As he weighed these choices, his gaze fell on Charlotte's neck, the brand still raw and angry against her skin. The sight hardened his resolve. "We changed the game," he said finally. "Make them react to us instead of the other way around." Charlotte looked skeptical but attentive. "How?" "There's a town about 10 miles east of here, Riverton. Small place, but it's got a telegraph office and a sheriff." Nathan began checking his weapons. "If we can get there, send a wire to the federal marshal in Austin. You think a local sheriff will help us against Wagner?" Charlotte's doubt was evident. These company towns, the law works for whoever pays best. "Maybe, but Wagner's men won't know which way the sheriff leans until they show themselves. Might make them hesitate." Nathan finished loading his rifle. "Besides, we need supplies if we're going to make it to Green Valley. And information." Charlotte considered this, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we'll need to be careful. If Wagner has influence there, we'll be ghosts," Nathan assured her. "In and out before anyone knows we were there." The plan set, they mounted up, Charlotte behind Nathan this time, and set off toward Riverton, keeping to the roughest terrain where their pursuers' larger group would struggle to follow quickly. As they rode, Nathan found himself acutely aware of Charlotte's arms around his waist, her presence at his back both reassuring and disquieting. It had been years since he'd allowed anyone this close, physically or otherwise. The sensation was almost forgotten, like a language once known but long unused. They reached the outskirts of Riverton as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. It was a typical frontier town. One main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a few side streets of smaller structures, and scattered houses marking its boundaries. A water tower stood at the northern end, and near it the railroad station that had given the town its purpose. Nathan reined in at a copse of trees about a quarter-mile from town, dismounting to help Charlotte down. "We'll go in separately," he said, handing her a small pouch of coins. "Less conspicuous that way. You find the general store, get whatever supplies you can carry. I'll check the telegraph office and try to get a feel for the local law." Charlotte took the money, hesitation evident in her posture. "What if something goes wrong?" "Meet back here in 1 hour. If either of us doesn't show—" Nathan left the implication hanging. Charlotte nodded, understanding. "Be careful." "Always am." They parted at the edge of town, Charlotte pulling a shawl over her head to conceal her face and the brand on her neck, Nathan adjusting his hat low over his eyes. As they went their separate ways, Nathan found himself glancing back, watching until Charlotte disappeared around a corner before continuing on his own mission. The telegraph office was located in the railroad station, a small but well-maintained building that spoke of the Western Rail Company's prosperity. Nathan entered casually, nodding to the clerk behind the counter, a young man with spectacles perched on a narrow nose. "Afternoon," Nathan greeted him. "Need to send a wire to Austin." "Certainly, sir." The clerk pushed a form across the counter. "Please write your message here. That'll be 25 cents per word." Nathan considered his message carefully. It needed to convey urgency without revealing too much. Wagner might well have someone monitoring telegrams. Finally, he wrote to Federal Marshal James Collins, Austin, Texas, from Men Hawkins. "Evidence located regarding Wagner case stop. Witnesses in danger. Stop. Require immediate assistance. Riverton stop." The clerk read the message, his expression carefully neutral. "That'll be $5.50, sir." Nathan paid, watching as the clerk tapped out the message on his key. The young man's hands were steady, his face giving nothing away, but Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that the message might never reach its intended recipient. "When might I expect a reply?" he asked casually. Hard to say, sir. Telegraph line to Austin's been temperamental lately. The clerk handed him a receipt. Check back tomorrow, perhaps. Nathan nodded his thanks and left, stepping onto the station platform. From this vantage point, he could see most of the town, including the sheriff's office, across the street from the town's largest saloon. He made his way there, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. The office was a small building with barred windows and a wooden sign declaring it the domain of Sheriff Howard Perkins. Through the front window, Nathan could see a large man seated at a desk, his attention focused on papers before him. As Nathan watched, a familiar figure emerge from the saloon across the street, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache. Reed Wagner. Nathan instinctively stepped deeper into the shadows, his hand moving to his revolver. Wagner crossed to the sheriff's office, entering without knocking. Through the window, Nathan saw Sheriff Perkins rise to greet him, the two men shaking hands like old friends. The confirmation of Charlotte's fears was clear. The local law was in Wagner's pocket, which meant the telegraph clerk might well be too. Their message to Austin was likely already in Wagner's hands. Nathan cursed silently. They needed to leave Riverton immediately before Wagner realized they were in town. He turned to head back toward their meeting point, but froze at the sound of a familiar voice. Well, I'll be damned. Nathan Hawkins in the flesh. Nathan turned slowly to face Thomas Parker. Older than he remembered, his red hair, now more gray than auburn, but unmistakable with his slight limp and sharp blue eyes. Parker, Nathan acknowledged, his voice neutral, even as his mind raced. According to Charlotte, this was the man who had betrayed her to Wagner. The man who might have been responsible for their witness disappearing 5 years ago, and possibly for Catherine's death. Parker smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Heard you left Pinkerton. Bounty hunting now is a bit of a step down for a man of your talents. It has its advantages. Less paperwork, better company. Nathan kept his hand near his holster, though he didn't draw. Not yet. What brings you to Riverton? Oh, this and that. Consulting work mostly. Parker gestured toward the saloon. Buy you a drink for old time's sake. Nathan knew he should refuse, should find Charlotte and get out of town immediately. But Parker was a link to his past, to Catherine, to Wagner. The temptation to learn what the man knew was too strong. One drink, he agreed. The saloon was typical of frontier establishments. A long bar along one-wall tables scattered throughout a small stage in the corner where a piano player half-heartedly tapped out a tune. Despite the early hours, several tables were occupied mostly by men with the weathered look of railroad workers or cowboys. Parker led the way to a corner table, signaling for 2 whiskeys as they sat. Nathan positioned himself with his back to the wall, keeping the entrance and as much of the room as possible in his line of sight. So, Parker said when their drinks arrived, what really brings you to Riverton? Last I heard you were working down near the border. Nathan sipped his whiskey, buying time. Following a bounty. Trail led here. Must be quite a bounty to bring you this far north. Has its compensations. Parker studied him over the rim of his glass. You always were a man of few words, Hawkins. I admired that about you. No unnecessary chatter, just the facts in the bar. Speaking of the bar, Nathan said, setting down his glass. Heard you left Pinkerton, too. About 3 years after you. Agency was changing, becoming too corporate. Parker shrugged. Private consulting pays better anyway. Who do you consult for these days? A knowing smile touched Parker's lips. Various interests, railroad security mostly. Speaking of which, he leaned forward slightly. I heard an interesting rumor that you were seen with a certain young lady who's wanted for questioning. Boston girl journalist. Ring any bells? Nathan kept his expression neutral. Can't say it does. No, Parker seemed amused rather than convinced. Shame, there's quite a reward for information leading to her recovery. Railroad companies very concerned about her well-being. I bet they are. Parker's smile faded. Look, Hawkins, we were friends once. Let me give you some friendly advice. Whatever you're involved in, whatever you think you know, walk away. This territory belongs to the railroad now, and the railroad takes care of its own. Like you took care of our witness in the Wagner case, Nathan asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Parker didn't flinch. Ancient history. Nobody's hands were clean in that business. Catherine's were. At the mention of Nathan's wife, something like regret flickered in Parker's eyes. Catherine was collateral damage. Unfortunate, but not intentional. The admission so casually delivered hit Nathan like a physical blow. It was one thing to suspect Parker's involvement, another to hear it confirmed. You son of a bitch, he said softly, his hand moving to his revolver beneath the table. Parker raised a placating hand. Easy now. This isn't the time or place for settling old scores, especially when you've got bigger problems. He nodded toward the saloon entrance where Reed Wagner had just walked in, accompanied by Sheriff Perkins and two other men. Nathan tensed, but Wagner hadn't noticed them yet, heading for the bar with his companions. "Back door," Parker said quietly. "Behind the stage. I'll distract them." Nathan's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you help me?" Parker drained his whiskey. "Let's just say I'm paying a debt, one that's long overdue." He stood. "But after this we're square. And if our paths cross again—" He left the threat unspoken. Nathan remained seated for a moment, weighing his options. Parker could be setting him up, leading him into a trap. But Wagner was between him and the front door, and the hour Charlotte had given him was nearly up. "One more thing," Nathan said as Parker turned to leave. "Green Valley, where is it?" Parker's expression hardened. "Know where you want to go, Hawkins. It's a ghost town now. Wagner's men saw to that 3 years ago." With that, he moved toward the bar, raising his voice in greeting to Wagner and the sheriff. Nathan used the distraction to slip behind the stage and through the rear door, emerging into an alley behind the saloon. He moved quickly through the back streets of Riverton, his mind racing with Parker's revelation. Green Valley was gone, destroyed by Wagner. If true, it meant Charlotte's father was either dead or fled elsewhere, and it meant they were heading into a trap if they continued north. Nathan reached their meeting point ahead of schedule, finding it still deserted. He secured his horse in the trees and settled in to wait, Parker's warning echoing in his mind. "Know where you want to go, Hawkins. It's a ghost town now." The sun dipped, lower shadows lengthening across the land, and still Charlotte did not come. The hour came and went, then another. Nathan's concern deepened with each passing minute. Charlotte should have returned by now, even allowing for caution and the need to acquire supplies unnoticed. He considered the possibilities, none of them good. She might have been recognized and captured. She might have decided to continue alone, abandoning their partnership. Or she might be hiding, waiting for Wagner's men to leave town before making her way back. The rational choice would be to assume she'd been captured and leave while he still could. Wagner would have the entire town looking for him by now, especially if Parker had revealed their meeting. The smart play was to ride out, save himself. Instead, Nathan found himself moving back toward town, keeping to the shadows, a familiar tension settling in his shoulders. It had been years since he'd conducted this kind of urban reconnaissance, but the skills returned easily. Identifying sight lines, mapping potential escape routes, scanning for watchers and informants. The main street was busier now. The workday ended, and the evening's entertainment begun. Lanterns glowed in saloon windows, and the sounds of a piano and raucous laughter spilled into the street. Nathan kept to the side alleys, working his way toward the general store where Charlotte should have gone. The store was closed, shutters drawn across its windows. Nathan circled around to the back, finding a loading dock and a door that looked like it led to a storeroom. It was locked, but a few moments' work with a small set of picks from his pocket remedied that. The storeroom was dark and smelled of coffee, tobacco, and leather. Nathan moved cautiously, listening for any sound that might indicate the presence of others. Hearing nothing, he made his way to the door that presumably led into the main store. It opened onto darkness, the shop closed for the night. Nathan was about to retreat, concluding Charlotte wasn't here, when he noticed something on the counter. A lady's shawl carelessly left behind. The same shawl Charlotte had used to cover her head and neck. He picked it up, confirming his suspicion. Charlotte had been here, but something had prevented her from leaving with her purchase. The question was whether she'd been discovered or had fled in haste. A noise from the street, the jingle of spurs and low voices, sent Nathan back into the shadows of the storeroom. Through a small window, he could see two men pass by, rifles cradled in their arms. Wagner's men, no doubt, searching for them. Nathan waited until they had moved on before slipping out the back door, securing it behind him to hide his entry. If Charlotte had been captured, she might be held at the sheriff's office or at Wagner's headquarters, wherever that might be. He made his way toward the sheriff's office, first approaching from the rear. The building was dark except for a single lantern burning in the front office. Through the back window, Nathan could see into the cell area. Two small cages, both empty. Not here, then. But where Nathan retreated into the shadows, considering his options. If Wagner had Charlotte, he might be keeping her at the railroad station or in one of the company buildings. But searching blindly was too risky. He needed information. As if in answer to his unspoken need, the back door of the saloon across the street opened, and a young Mexican woman emerged carrying a bucket of dirty water, which she emptied into the alley. In the spill of light from the doorway, Nathan could see she wore the simple dress of a serving girl. Acting on instinct, Nathan stepped forward, making enough noise to alert her to his presence without startling her too badly. The woman turned quickly, one hand going to her apron pocket where Nathan suspected she kept a small knife or other protection. Smart girl. "Who's there?" she called softly in accented English. "Friend Aiden," Nathan replied, keeping his voice low. "Looking for information." "I can pay." She hesitated, then stepped further into the alley, allowing the door to close behind her. What kind of information, senor? A woman was taken today. Young, dark hair, Eastern accent. Where would they keep her? The serving girl studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Why do you want to know? She's a friend, in danger. Something in his tone must have convinced her, for she glanced nervously toward the street before speaking again. The old mine, she said quietly. North of town about 2 miles. That is where they take them. Hid them, Nathan asked, though he already suspected the answer. The women who disappear. Her voice hardened. My sister was one of them. 3 months ago. She never came back. Nathan reached into his pocket, pulling out several coins which he offered to her. I'm sorry about your sister. She accepted the money but shook her head. Don't be sorry, senor. Be careful. The men who run the mine, they are devils, not men. Do you know a woman named Charlotte Morgan, or perhaps they're calling her Elizabeth? The serving girl's eyes widened slightly. The journalist from Boston, the one who escaped. Nathan nodded, hope rising. You know of her. Everyone in Riverton knows of her. She is the only one who ever escaped the mine. The woman leaned closer. They brought her back today. I heard the men talking. They are taking her to someone called the Commander tomorrow. Nathan's chest tightened. So Wagner had recaptured Charlotte. And this Commander, the mysterious figure Charlotte had mentioned from her journal, was finally making an appearance. Thank you, he said, already planning his next move. What's your name? Rosalita, she replied. Then unexpectedly, she pressed something into his hand. If you truly wish to help your friend find these people, they know the mountains, the hidden paths. They fight against Wagner and his devils. Nathan looked down at what she'd given him, a small piece of paper with a crude map drawn on it, showing a path into the mountains north of town. Who are they? He asked. Rosalita's expression was solemn in the dim light. Survivors, from Green Valley. Before Nathan could question her further, the saloon door opened, spilling light and noise into the alley. Rosalita quickly stepped back, resuming her duties as if their conversation had never occurred. Nathan melted into the shadows, the paper clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Green Valley wasn't entirely gone, it seemed. Some had survived Wagner's destruction, and they were still fighting. Now he had a choice to make an attempt to rescue Charlotte from the mine immediately, or seek out these survivors who might provide assistance and information. Both options carry significant risks. The decision was made for him when he heard shouting from the direction of the livery stable where he'd left his horse. Someone had discovered his presence in town. With no time to waste, Nathan headed north away from the commotion. He would have to circle back for his horse later, if there was a later. For now, his priority was reaching the mine before Charlotte was transferred to this Commander. As he moved through the darkness, Parker's words echoed in his mind. Know where you want to go, Hawkins? It's a ghost town now, perhaps. But ghosts, Nathan knew all too well, could still haunt the living. And if the survivors of Green Valley were anything like the determined young woman he'd come to admire, they might well be Wagner's reckoning. First, though, he had to save Charlotte from a fate he'd failed to prevent once before. This time, he wouldn't fail. The night swallowed him as he moved north, guided by starlight and a determination forged in loss. Somewhere ahead lay answers to questions 5 years in the asking, and perhaps at last justice for Catherine. The abandoned mine loomed against the night sky, a dark wound in the hillside north of Riverton. What had once been an operation bustling with men and machinery now stood silent, its weathered structures like the bones of some prehistoric beast picked clean by scavengers. But Nathan knew appearances were deceiving. Within those skeletal remains, something still lived, something that preyed on the vulnerable. He approached with the caution of a man who had spent years tracking both predator and prey. The main entrance was too obvious, likely guarded. Instead, he circled the perimeter, staying low and using the scattered equipment and debris for cover. 2 guards stood at the mine entrance, rifles resting casually against their shoulders as they smoked and conversed in low voices. Beyond them, a light spilled from what had once been the foreman's office. Now Nathan guessed Wagner's command post. Further reconnaissance revealed a secondary entrance, a narrow vent shaft partially concealed by overgrowth. It was a tight fit, but Nathan had no better option. Securing his revolver and knife, he eased into the opening, descending carefully into the darkness below. The shaft opened into a maintenance tunnel dimly lit by oil lamps placed at irregular intervals. Nathan moved silently, pausing at each junction to listen for voices or footsteps. The air was thick with dust and something else, a medicinal smell that seemed out of place in a mine. As he ventured deeper, the tunnel widened into what had once been a natural cavern, now converted into a makeshift laboratory. Tables lined the walls, crowded with glass bottles, tubes, and equipment Nathan didn't recognize. Papers covered in diagrams and notations were pinned to boards. But it was the center of the room that drew his attention and turned his blood cold. Metal cages, 6 of them arranged in a circle. Each contained a cot and a bucket, nothing more. And in 4 of them, women sat or lay motionless, their expressions vacant, their bodies marked with the same brand Charlotte carried. Nathan's hand tightened on his revolver. Each face reflected Charlotte's words. I saw a woman convulse until her spine snapped. They took notes, like it was nothing more than a laboratory demonstration. Charlotte wasn't among them. These women were test subjects, their humanity stripped away by whatever experiments Wagner and his commander conducted. Nathan knew he couldn't leave them, but Charlotte remained his priority. Find her first, then figure out how to free the others. He continued past the laboratory, deeper into the mine, following the sound of voices that echoed faintly through the tunnels. The passage eventually opened onto a gallery overlooking a larger chamber below, what miners would have called the glory hole, where the richest veins had been excavated. The chamber had been converted into a staging area. Wagons stood ready, their canvas covers concealing their cargo. Men moved about loading crates and securing tarps. And there in the center stood Reed Wagner, issuing orders to his subordinates. Nathan pressed against the wall, straining to hear their conversation over the echoing sounds of activity. Shipment leaves at dawn, Wagner was saying. The commander wants the girl delivered personally along with the latest batch. She's been trouble before, another man responded. The sheriff, Nathan realized. You sure we shouldn't just eliminate her here? Wagner shook his head. Orders are clear. The commander thinks she might have information about the other survivors. Wants to question her himself. And the rest of the subjects. Transfer the 2 that responded to the treatment. Dispose of the others. Wagner's tone was clinical, devoid of humanity. We'll need fresh specimens for the next phase anyway. Nathan's jaw tightened. Human lives reduced to specimens. It was the language of butchers, not men. The sheriff nodded toward a side tunnel. She's secure in the holding cell, though after last time I doubled the guard. Finally, Charlotte's location. Nathan memorized the direction, then retreated silently back into the maintenance tunnel. He needed to move quickly. Once dawn came, Charlotte would be beyond his reach, delivered to this mysterious commander like a package. The holding area was more heavily guarded than the laboratory. 2 men stationed outside a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Nathan would need a distraction. He backtracked to the laboratory, an idea forming. The women in the cages watched him with dull eyes as he examined the equipment along the walls. Most was unfamiliar, but he recognized enough. Chemicals, burners, pressure vessels. The materials for chaos. Working quickly, Nathan arranged a delayed reaction, a slow-burning fuse leading to several volatile compounds. It wouldn't destroy the mine, but it would create enough smoke and confusion to serve his purpose. With the fuse lit, he retreated to a position near the holding cell, counting down the seconds. The explosion, when it came, was more powerful than he'd anticipated. A deep boom followed by the crash of breaking glass and shouts of alarm. The guards at Charlotte's door hesitated only briefly before running toward the source of the commotion. Nathan gave them a 10-second head start, then moved. The door was locked, but the key hung on a hook nearby. Arrogance or oversight, it didn't matter. Nathan unlocked the door and slipped inside. Charlotte lay on a narrow cot, her wrists and ankles bound. At the sound of the door, she tensed, then squinted through the dim light. Nathan, her voice was rough, disbelieving. Time to go, he said, cutting her bonds with his knife. Can you walk? She nodded, rubbing her wrists as circulation returned. They drugged me, but it's wearing off. Good, we don't have much time. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. There's chaos out there. Stay close to me. As they moved into the corridor, shouts and running footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Smoke was beginning to fill the air, around acrid and stinging. Nathan led Charlotte away from the commotion toward the maintenance tunnel he'd used to enter. Wait, Charlotte said, suddenly pulling back. The other women, we can't leave them. Nathan met her gaze. In her eyes, he saw not just concern, but recognition. She had been one of those women had endured what they were enduring. To abandon them was unthinkable to her. It's too dangerous, he said, though the words tasted bitter. There are at least a dozen armed men between us and them. They'll kill them, Nathan. Charlotte's voice was steady despite her weakened state. I heard Wagner give the order. Dispose of the ones who don't respond to treatment. That's what he said. Nathan hesitated, torn between the rescue at hand and the larger atrocity around them. Getting Charlotte to safety was the priority, the rational choice, but leaving those women to die. Damn it, he muttered, then nodded. We'll try, but if things go south, you run. Understand, don't wait for me. Charlotte's expression was answer enough. They retraced their steps toward the laboratory, moving with greater urgency now. As the smoke thickened, the explosion had created the perfect cover, but it wouldn't last forever. Soon Wagner would realize this was no accident. The laboratory was in disarray when they reached it. Equipment shattered, paper scattered. Two of Wagner's men were attempting to douse a chemical fire in one corner, their backs to the entrance. The women in the cages watched with the first stirrings of hope in their eyes. Nathan dispatched the guards silently approaching from behind and striking with practiced efficiency. They collapsed without raising the alarm. "Find the keys," he instructed Charlotte as he secured the entrance. She searched the fallen guards, finding a ring of keys in one man's pocket. With shaking hands, she began unlocking the cages, murmuring reassurances to the women inside. "Can they walk?" Nathan asked, keeping watch at the door. "I think so," Charlotte replied, helping a gaunt woman to her feet. "But they're weak. They've been experimented on." Nathan's expression hardened. "We'll manage. There's a maintenance tunnel that leads outside. If we can reach it, we might make it to the trees before they organize a search." As Charlotte freed the last woman, Nathan heard voices approaching. Wagner's men returning to secure the laboratory. They were out of time. "Go," he told Charlotte, drawing his revolver. "Second junction, then left. Follow the tunnel until you see starlight. I'll hold them here, then follow." Charlotte hesitated, clearly torn between the escape and staying with him. "You promised," she reminded him. "No sacrificial stands." "Not planning on one," Nathan assured her. "Just buying time. Now go." With a final nod, Charlotte led the weakened women toward the maintenance tunnel, supporting those who could barely stand. Nathan positioned himself behind an overturned table gun ready. When Wagner's men burst in, Nathan fired twice, not to kill but to drive them back. They retreated, returning fire blindly through the doorway. Nathan used the opportunity to fall back to a secondary position, continuing to lay down covering fire as he retreated toward the maintenance tunnel. He was nearly there when a bullet grazed his arm, the impact spinning him against the wall. Nathan grunted, but kept moving, knowing that stopping meant death, not just for him, but for Charlotte and the women now fleeing through the tunnel. He reached the tunnel entrance just as more of Wagner's men appeared, their shouts echoing through the chamber. Nathan fired his remaining rounds, then turned and ran, clutching his bleeding arm. The tunnel seemed longer in retreat, each step a battle against the burning in his lungs and the throbbing in his arm. But ahead he could see movement, the women making their slow, desperate way toward freedom. Charlotte waited at the final junction, relief washing over her face as Nathan appeared. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for his arm. "It's nothing," he replied, though the pain suggested otherwise. "Keep moving. They'll be right behind us." Together they urged the weakened women forward, reaching the vent shaft just as voices echoed from deeper in the tunnel. The climb would be difficult for the prisoners, but there was no alternative. "I'll go first," Nathan said. "Help pull them up." One by one they emerged into the cool night air, the starlight guiding them toward the cover of trees beyond the mine perimeter. Behind them, lanterns bobbed as Wagner's men began to fan out in search of the escapees. They reached the tree line just as the first shouts of discovery came from the mine entrance. The forest provided cover, but the women were exhausted, stumbling even with Charlotte and Nathan's support. "We need somewhere to hide, to rest," Charlotte whispered, her own strength flagging. Nathan nodded, thinking of the map Rosalita had given him. "There might be a place, but it's a risk. I don't know these people." "What people?" "Survivors. From Green Valley." Charlotte's eyes widened. "My father, he could be with them." "Or they could be hostile to strangers," Nathan cautioned. "But right now they're our best hope." With the sounds of pursuit growing behind them, they had little choice. Nathan consulted the crude map, orienting himself by the stars, then led their battered group deeper into the forest toward the mountains, where the remnants of Green Valley supposedly awaited. Dawn found them exhausted but alive, hidden in a ravine several miles from the mine. The women had collapsed at the first opportunity, their bodies pushed beyond endurance. Charlotte, despite her own ordeal, had tended to them as best she could with their limited supplies. Nathan watched her move among the women, speaking softly, offering water, checking for injuries. Her compassion was remarkable, given what she herself had endured. It reminded him painfully of Catherine, who had possessed a similar strength, the ability to care for others even in the midst of her own suffering. His arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him. Charlotte had bandaged it with a strip torn from her petticoat, but it needed proper cleaning. Infection in these conditions could be a death sentence. "You should rest," Charlotte said, approaching him with the canteen. "You've lost blood." Nathan shook his head. "Wagner's men will be combing these hills by now. We need to keep moving. These women can barely stand, let alone walk much further." Charlotte's voice was low but firm. "And you're in no condition to carry them." She was right, though Nathan was reluctant to admit it. Their situation was precarious. 5 exhausted women, limited supplies, and Wagner's men undoubtedly searching for them with increasing fury. "The map," Nathan said, pulling the crumpled paper from his pocket. "It shows a path through these mountains to where the Green Valley survivors are supposedly hiding. If we can find them. Charlotte studied the crude drawing. This mark here, I think it's Trail Canyon. My father mentioned it in his letters. Said it was the back way into Green Valley. You know how to find it. She nodded slowly. I think so. He described landmarks. A split rock shaped like a wolf's head, then a meadow with a solitary pine. It wasn't much, but it was better than wandering blindly. Nathan pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the protest from his wounded arm. We'll rest another hour, then move out. The farther we get from the mine before nightfall, the better our chances. Charlotte agreed, though concern shadowed her eyes as she looked at the sleeping women. They didn't even know their names, she said quietly. Wagner's drugs. They've been hollowed out. Nathan had seen it before. People reduced to shells by trauma and abuse. Sometimes they recovered. Often they didn't. But at least now they had a chance. We'll get them somewhere safe, he promised. Then find your father if he's still alive. And Wagner, Charlotte asked, a hardness entering her voice. What about him? Nathan thought of the laboratory, the cages, the clinical detachment with which Wagner had ordered lives disposed of. His answer came without hesitation. He'll answer for it, him and this commander he serves. Charlotte held his gaze, searching for something. Conviction, perhaps, or shared purpose. Whatever she saw satisfied her, for she nodded once, a soldier acknowledging a mission. 1 hour, she agreed, then we move. The mountains grew steeper as they progressed, the forest denser. Nathan led with Charlotte, bringing up the rear to ensure none of the weakened women fell behind. They moved slowly, forced to rest frequently. By mid-afternoon, they had found the first landmark, a towering formation of split rock that did indeed resemble a wolf's head in profile. Charlotte's confidence grew with the confirmation. We're on the right path, she said, her voice stronger than it had been earlier. The meadow should be another mile or so over that ridge. Nathan nodded, though privately he wondered what awaited them beyond the meadow. The survivors of Green Valley, if they existed, had good reason to be wary of strangers. Their reception might be far from welcoming. As they crested the ridge, the forest opened into a small meadow dotted with wildflowers. And there in its center stood a solitary pine tree, just as Charlotte had described. We're close, she whispered, a mixture of hope and anxiety in her voice. Green Valley is just beyond the next ridge. But as they started across the meadow, Nathan held up a hand, stopping the group. Something wasn't right. The meadow was too exposed, too perfect a location for an ambush. His instincts proved correct a moment later when figures emerged from the tree line opposite them. At least 6 men armed with rifles, their faces weather-beaten and grim beneath broad-brimmed hats. That's far enough, called one, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard. State your business. Nathan raised his hand, slowly motioning for the others to do the same. We're seeking refuge, he called back. We have wounded with us, women from the mine. The mention of the mine caused a visible reaction among the armed men. They exchanged glances, their grip on their weapons tightening. Who sent you? Demanded the bearded man. How'd you find this place? Rosalita from Riverton, Nathan answered truthfully. She gave us a map, said you might help. The name seemed to carry weight. The men conferred briefly, then the leader spoke again. Approach slowly. Just you and one other. The rest stay where they are. Nathan turned to Charlotte. Wait here with the women. If anything happens, head east toward the river. You might find help in the settlements there. Charlotte shook her head. I'm coming with you. These might be my father's people. There was no time to argue. Nathan nodded reluctantly, and together they walked forward, hands still raised to show they carried no weapons. As they drew closer, Nathan studied the men who awaited them. They weren't outlaws or desperados. Their clothes, though worn, were those of working men, farmers, craftsmen, miners. Their eyes held wariness, but not cruelty. The bearded man stepped forward as they approached. I'm Samuel Wright, he said, leader of what's left of Green Valley. Nathan Hawkins, this is Charlotte Morgan. At the name Morgan, a visible shock passed through Samuel's weathered face. Morgan, he repeated. Any relation to James Morgan? Charlotte's breath caught. He's my father. I've been searching for him. Samuel studied her intently, searching for something in her features. Whatever he found must have satisfied him, for his expression softened slightly. James spoke of a daughter back east, he said. Said she was a journalist. I am, Charlotte confirmed. Boston Times. I came west investigating disappearances along the railroad. Found more than I bargained for. Samuel nodded grimly. Wagner's operation, we know it well. He gestured to the brand visible on Charlotte's neck. You escaped once. Not many do that. Twice now, Nathan interjected. With help, and we brought others. He nodded toward the women waiting at the edge of the meadow. They need medical attention. Shelter. Samuel considered this, then turned to one of his men. Martin, take a party and bring those women in. Carefully, they've been through hell if they're from the mine. As the men moved to assist the former captives, Samuel returned his attention to Nathan and Charlotte. You've taken a mighty risk coming here. Wagner's men patrol these mountains regular. Anyone they find, they kill. We had little choice, Nathan replied. Wagner would have shipped Charlotte to someone called the Commander by morning. The others were to be disposed of. A shadow crossed Samuel's face at the mention of the Commander. Come with me, he said after a moment. There's someone who wants to meet you. Both of you. He led them along a nearly invisible path that wound through dense forest before descending into a narrow canyon. At its base, hidden from aerial view by the canyon walls and the forest canopy, lay a small settlement, perhaps 20 structures ranging from log cabins to canvas tents. Welcome to New Green Valley, Samuel said, a hint of pride in his voice. It's not much, but it's safe, for now. People emerged from the buildings as they approached, men, women, and a few children, all regarding the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Nathan noted the wariness in their postures, the way some hands strayed to concealed weapons. These were people who had learned hard lessons about trust. Samuel led them to a cabin near the center of the settlement, larger than the others and constructed with greater care. He knocked once, then entered without waiting for a response. The interior was simply furnished but comfortable. A table and chairs, a small kitchen area, shelves lined with books and papers. At the table sat an older man bent over what appeared to be maps and documents. He looked up as they entered, his weathered face framed by a full beard streaked with gray. Charlotte gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Father. The man stared, disbelief giving way to recognition. Charlotte, my God, is it really you? James Morgan rose unsteadily to his feet, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. For a moment, neither moved, separated by 15 years of absence and uncertainty. Then, as if a dam had broken, Charlotte rushed forward into her father's embrace. Nathan stood awkwardly by the door, feeling like an intruder on this private reunion. Samuel caught his eye and nodded toward the door. Together, they stepped outside, leaving father and daughter to their moment. He never thought he'd see her again, Samuel said quietly as they walked a short distance from the cabin. Talked about her often, though. His little girl back east, making her way as a journalist. He was proud of that. Nathan nodded, understanding the bittersweet nature of such pride. Joy in a loved one's accomplishments, tempered by the pain of separation. How did you all end up here, he asked. Charlotte mentioned Green Valley was destroyed. Samuel's expression darkened. 3 years ago, Wagner's men came in the night, said it was to clear land for the railroad, but we knew the truth. We'd been gathering evidence, you see, about the disappearances, about what they were doing at the mine. The experiments, Nathan supplied, among other things. Wagner's operation goes beyond just the railroad. He's part of something bigger, something that reaches into government, banks, law enforcement. Samuel shook his head. Most folks in Green Valley were already refugees, people who'd lost homes, land, loved ones to the railroad's expansion. We thought we were safe hidden away in the mountains. We were wrong. But some of you survived. About 30 of us made it out through Trail Canyon while the fighting was worst. James led us, helped us establish this place. Samuel gazed around the small settlement. It's not much, but we've made it work. Keep to ourselves, stay alert. Help others when we can. Like the women from the mine, Nathan observed. Samuel nodded. We've managed to rescue a few over the years. It's dangerous work, though. Wagner's men are always watching. And now with the commander taking a personal interest? Who is he? Nathan asked. This commander everyone seems to fear. Samuel glanced around, lowering his voice despite the lack of eavesdroppers. No one knows for certain. Some high-up government official or railroad baron, most likely. Someone with enough power to make problems disappear. He met Nathan's gaze directly. Someone who can turn the law to his purposes and make men like Wagner seem respectable. The description stirred something in Nathan's memory. Parker's words in the saloon, and before that, the collapse of the case against Wagner 5 years ago. A power operating in the shadows, manipulating events while remaining untouchable. And you've been fighting them, Nathan said. All this time. In our way, small victories mostly, rescuing people when we can, gathering evidence, sending information east to newspapers and honest officials. Samuel's weathered face showed the toll of this constant struggle. It's not enough, but it's something. Nathan was about to inquire further when the door to James Morgan's cabin opened. Charlotte emerged, her face showing the complex emotions of their reunion, joy mixed with sorrow, relief with lingering anxiety. Nathan, she called, my father wants to speak with you. Inside, James Morgan had composed himself, though his eyes still shone with the emotion of seeing his daughter after so many years. He gestured for Nathan to sit at the table across from him. Charlotte tells me you saved her life, he said without preamble. Twice now. I'm in your debt. Nathan shook his head. No debt. She would have done the same. A small smile touched James's lips. Yes, she would have. Always was stubborn, that way even as a child. The smile faded. She also tells me you have personal reasons for opposing Wagner. Something about a case 5 years ago and your wife. Nathan's jaw tightened involuntarily. That's right. James studied him for a moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. Samuel tells me you asked about the commander. There's something you should see. He rose and moved to a chest in the corner of the cabin, unlocking it with a key he wore around his neck. From within, he withdrew a leather portfolio which he placed on the table. For 15 years, I've been collecting information about the organization Wagner serves. James explained, opening the portfolio to reveal neatly organized documents. It started when my wife Sarah disappeared. She was a nurse working at a clinic near the rail line. She noticed patterns, workers falling ill with strange symptoms, women vanishing without trace. She began documenting cases. He handed Nathan a journal similar to Charlotte's, the pages filled with a neat, feminine script. This was her last record. She gave it to me the day before she disappeared. Nathan scanned the entries, his heart rate accelerating as he recognized descriptions of symptoms identical to those Catherine had suffered. Rapid onset respiratory distress, fever, internal hemorrhaging, all presenting like aggressive consumption but progressing far too quickly. They were testing poisons, James continued, his voice tight with old grief. Developing them for various purposes, military applications, political assassinations, removing inconvenient opponents. Sarah documented it all. When they realized what she knew, they took her. And you've been hunting them ever since, Nathan said, understanding the driven look in the older man's eyes. James nodded. At first I thought it was just Wagner and his men. But as I dug deeper, I discovered he was merely a lieutenant in a much larger organization, one directed by the man they call the commander. He pulled another document from the portfolio, a faded photograph showing a group of men in formal attire standing on the steps of what appeared to be a government building. This was taken in Austin 10 years ago, James explained. A gathering of railroad executives, judges, military officers. Look at the man in the center. Nathan studied the photograph. The central figure was an older gentleman with distinguished features, silver hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to power. Judge Lawrence Hamilton, James said, one of the most respected jurists in Texas, and I believe the man who calls himself the commander. Nathan felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. Judge Hamilton, the same judge who had presided over Wagner's trial 5 years ago, the man who had dismissed the case when their key witness failed to appear. Hamilton, Nathan repeated the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. He was the judge in Wagner's trial. He's the one who let him walk free. James nodded grimly. Not a coincidence, I imagine. No, Nathan agreed, his mind racing through the implications. It explains everything. How Wagner always stayed one step ahead of the law. How evidence disappeared, how witnesses vanished. And how your wife died, James added softly. If she knew something about their operation, or if they wanted to send you a message. Nathan's hands clenched involuntarily. For 5 years, he directed his rage at Wagner, believing him responsible for Catherine's death. But if James was right, Wagner had merely been the instrument. Judge Hamilton, the commander, had given the order. I need proof, Nathan said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. Proof that will stand up in court. Proof that even Hamilton can't dismiss. James exchanged a glance with Charlotte, who had been listening silently by the door. We might have it, he said cautiously, or part of it at least. He withdrew a final document from the portfolio, a letter written on official stationery bearing what appeared to be Hamilton's signature. This came into our possession 3 months ago through a sympathetic clerk in Hamilton's office, James explained. It's instructions to Wagner regarding experimental protocols and disposal of subjects, vague enough to provide deniability, but damning when combined with other evidence. Nathan examined the letter carefully. It's not enough on its own. We'd need more. Witnesses willing to testify, records from the mine, perhaps even samples of the poisons they're developing. And we'd need to get that evidence to someone who can't be bought or intimidated, Charlotte added, joining them at the table. Someone outside Hamilton's sphere of influence. James nodded thoughtfully. I have contacts in Washington, a senator who's been investigating railroad corruption. If we could get this evidence to him, Wagner would never let that happen, Nathan cautioned. And now that we've rescued Charlotte and the others, he'll be even more vigilant. Hamilton too, once he learns what's happened. Then we bring the fight to them, Charlotte said, her expression determined. Force them to make mistakes. Nathan looked at her with surprise. The fearful woman he had rescued in the desert seemed transformed, hardened by her experiences, but not broken by them. "What do you propose?" James asked his daughter. Charlotte's eyes met Nathan's, seeking something. Approval, perhaps, or partnership. "We use me as bait," she said simply. "Let Wagner know I've returned to Riverton. Make him think I'm vulnerable." "Absolutely not," both men responded simultaneously. "Listen," Charlotte insisted. "Wagner wants me delivered to Hamilton, to the commander. That's our opportunity. If we can control the circumstances of that meeting—" "It's too dangerous," Nathan argued. "If anything went wrong, you'd be at their mercy, again." "I'm not suggesting I face them alone," Charlotte clarified, "but I am the one connection between all the threads. Wagner, the mine, Hamilton, even your wife's death, Nathan. I'm the bait they won't be able to resist." James looked stricken at the thought of risking his daughter after having just found her again. But Nathan saw the logic in Charlotte's proposal, dangerous as it was. Wagner and Hamilton had operated in the shadows for years, protected by their positions and the fear they inspired. Drawing them into the open might be the only way to expose them. "There would have to be safeguards," Nathan said slowly. "A plan with contingencies for every possibility." Charlotte nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Of course. And we wouldn't be alone. We'd have the Green Valley survivors, perhaps even some of your old Pinkerton contacts. And my Washington connection," James added reluctantly, recognizing the determination in his daughter's eyes. "Senator Matthews has been looking for a way to break the railroad's grip on the territory for years." The three fell silent, each contemplating the risks and possibilities of what they were considering. It wasn't just justice for Catherine or for Sarah Morgan or for the women who had suffered in Wagner's mine. It was a chance to expose a corruption that had infected every level of authority in the territory. "We'll need time to plan," Nathan finally said, "to gather resources, coordinate with your Washington contact, prepare fallback positions." "Time is the one thing we don't have," James countered. "Now that you've rescued Charlotte and the others, Wagner will be searching every inch of these mountains. And once Hamilton learns what's happened, he'll either pull Wagner back to safety or eliminate him to cover his tracks." "My father's right," Charlotte said. "We need to move quickly. Wagner will be expecting us to run to hide. He won't anticipate us turning and fighting." Nathan considered this. They were right about the timing, but the risks remained enormous. If they failed, it wouldn't just mean their deaths. It would mean the continuation of Hamilton's operation, perhaps for years to come. "One chance," he said finally. "We get one chance at this. If it fails—" "It won't," Charlotte assured him, though they all knew such confidence was more hope than certainty. James rose, moving to a map pinned to the wall, a detailed rendering of the territory with Riverton, the mine, and various railroad facilities marked in red. "We'll need to coordinate with Samuel and the others," he said, shifting into the role of strategist. "Some to remain here protecting the women you rescued, others to support the operation in Riverton." As James began outlining potential approaches, Nathan found himself studying Charlotte. She stood beside her father, pointing out features on the map, her expression focused and determined. This was not the same woman he had found in the desert begging for death, nor was she the frightened journalist he had rescued from the mine. She had transformed again, revealing new layers of strength and purpose. It reminded him with a pang of Catherine in the early days of their marriage. His wife had possessed that same quiet determination, the ability to face danger without flinching when the cause was just. Perhaps that was why he had been drawn to help Charlotte in the first place, some unconscious recognition of a kindred spirit. "Nathan," Charlotte's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Do you think it could work?" He focused on the map where she was pointing, a location marked as Hamilton Estate, about 20 miles east of Riverton. "The judge's private residence," James explained. "According to our information, he conducts most of his unofficial business there away from public scrutiny." Nathan studied the map, considering angles of approach, defensive positions, escape routes. His training as a Pinkerton detective resurfaced, analyzing the tactical situation with professional detachment. "It could work," he said finally. "With the right preparation, the right people in place. It's a risk, but—" He met Charlotte's gaze. "Sometimes the only way to defeat shadows is to step into the light." She smiled, then a genuine expression that transformed her face, reminding him that beneath the trauma and determination was a young woman barely 30, with a life ahead of her that might yet contain joy as well as purpose. "Then let's begin," she said simply. The planning continued late into the night. The three of them hunched over maps and documents, considering every angle, every contingency. Samuel Wright joined them after ensuring the rescued women were settled, bringing with him a wealth of local knowledge and a network of reliable allies. Their plan, though hastily assembled, was not without merit. Charlotte would return to Riverton, supposedly seeking information about her father. Nathan would remain hidden watching over her while establishing contact with Samuel's people in town. When Wagner inevitably moved to recapture Charlotte, they would allow it. But under controlled circumstances, that would lead not to Hamilton, but to a trap where Senator Matthews and federal marshals would be waiting. It was dangerous, complex, and relied on precise timing and communication. But as James had pointed out, sometimes the boldest plans were the most unexpected, and therefore the most likely to succeed. As the others continued refining details, Nathan stepped outside for a moment of air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. The settlement was quiet, most of its inhabitants long since retired to their beds. He was not surprised when Charlotte joined him a few minutes later, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the mountain chill. "You're having doubts," she said, not a question, but an observation. Nathan didn't deny it. Many things can go wrong. Wagner's unpredictable, Hamilton's powerful, and Parker's still out there, a wild card we can't account for. Yet you agreed to the plan. Because sometimes bad odds are the only odds you get. He glanced at her. But I want you to understand the risks. If Wagner realizes it's a trap, if Hamilton suspects anything, if the senator's men aren't in position, I understand, Charlotte said quietly. Believe me, I've had plenty of time to consider mortality recently. They stood in silence for a moment, the cool mountain air carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. May I ask about her? Charlotte finally said. Your wife, Nathan tensed slightly, the wound still raw despite the years. But something in Charlotte's tone, not pity or idle curiosity, but genuine compassion, made him answer. Catherine, he said, the name feeling strange on his lips after so long avoiding it. She was a teacher before we married, had a way with difficult children, could get through to them when no one else could. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She had the same approach with me, I suppose. She sounds remarkable. She was. Nathan's voice softened with memory. Stubborn, though. Once she decided something was right, there was no moving her. That's why she supported my work with Pinkerton even when it was dangerous. She believed in justice and making things right. Charlotte nodded, understanding. That's why you helped me, isn't it? Because it's what she would have wanted. Nathan had never articulated it to himself in quite those terms, but the truth of it resonated within him. Perhaps, or maybe I just couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. Not again. Again, he hadn't meant to reveal that much, but the quiet night in Charlotte's presence loosened something long held tight within him. Before Catherine fell ill, there was another case. A young woman witness to a murder Wagner had committed. She came to Pinkerton for protection. Nathan's jaw tightened. I was assigned to guard her until the trial, but someone got to her, drugged her tea while I was checking the perimeter. By the time I realized something was wrong, she was convulsing. Dead before the doctor arrived. It wasn't your fault, Charlotte said softly. Wasn't it? I was responsible for her safety. I failed. Nathan stared into the darkness. A month later, Catherine showed the same symptoms. By then I knew what to look for, but it was already too late. The damage was done. Charlotte was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. And you've carried that guilt ever since, she finally said. For both of them. Nathan didn't answer directly. When I found you in the desert asking for death, something in me refused to fail again. Even if it meant going against Wagner, against all odds. And now, Nathan considered the question. Now it's about more than redemption. It's about ending something that should have been stopped years ago. It's about justice. For Catherine, for your mother, for all the others who suffered while Hamilton and Wagner built their empire of pain. Charlotte nodded, her expression solemn in the starlight. Then we'll see it through. Together. The word hung between them. Together. Carrying implications neither was ready to examine closely. But in that moment, standing beneath the vast sky, Nathan felt something he had not experienced in years. Not hope, exactly, but perhaps its precursor. A sense that the future might hold more than solitary vengeance and bitter memories. We should rest, he said finally. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Charlotte nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, she began to sing softly, a gentle melody that seemed to rise and fall with the night breeze. It was a lullaby Nathan realized simple, yet haunting in its beauty. My mother sang that, she explained when she finished, catching his questioning look. When I was frightened as a child, I sang it to myself in the mind to remember who I was when they tried to take everything from me. The sharing of this intimate memory touched Nathan deeply. It was a gift freely given, a glimpse of the woman beneath the trauma and determination. It's beautiful, he said simply. Charlotte smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. Get some rest, Nathan. We have a long road ahead. As she turned to go, Nathan found himself speaking again. Charlotte, she paused, looking back. Whatever happens tomorrow or the day after, I'm glad our paths crossed. The admission surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. But it was true. Despite the danger, despite the reopening of old wounds meeting Charlotte, Morgan had awakened something in him he had thought long dead. "So am I," she replied softly. Then she was gone, leaving Nathan alone with the stars and the strange unfamiliar sensation of looking forward to dawn. Morning came with a flurry of activity as the small settlement prepared for what might be their most significant strike against Hamilton's organization. Men and women moved with purpose, gathering weapons, supplies, and information. Nathan found James in his cabin, bent over a message newly arrived from his Washington contact. "Senator Matthews will be in El Paso in 3 days," James reported, looking up as Nathan entered. "If we can secure evidence and witnesses, he'll bring federal marshals, men outside Hamilton's influence." 3 days is tight, Nathan observed, especially if we're using Charlotte as bait. James's expression darkened. "I still don't like that part of the plan, risking my daughter after I've only just found her again." "She's determined," Nathan reminded him. "And she's right. She's the connection that will draw Wagner out, make him vulnerable." "I know." James sighed heavily. "She's like her mother, stubborn as a mule when she believes in something." He studied Nathan for a moment. "You care for her?" It wasn't a question, and Nathan didn't treat it as one. "Charlotte is a remarkable woman. What happens after this is over?" He shrugged. "That's for her to decide." James seemed about to say more when Samuel Wright burst into the cabin, his weathered face tense with urgency. "Riders coming up Trail Canyon," he reported, "a dozen at least heavily armed." "Wagner's men?" Nathan asked, immediately alert. Samuel nodded grimly. "Must have found our trail from the mine. They'll reach the settlement within the hour." James cursed under his breath. "We're not ready. The women are still too weak to travel, and half our fighting force is already positioned near Riverton." "Then we stand and fight." Samuel set his hand, moving to the rifle slung across his back. "This canyon's defensible. We've prepared for this." Nathan considered their options rapidly. A direct confrontation would be costly, even with the natural advantages of the canyon. And if they were defeated, there would be no one left to oppose Hamilton and his organization. "What about the Eastern Pass?" he asked, recalling the map they had studied the night before. "Is it still passable?" "Barely," Samuel replied. "Landslide narrowed it last spring. Might get horses through single file, but that's about it." "Perfect," Nathan set a plan forming. "We split up. James, you take Charlotte, the rescued women, and half your people east. Samuel and I will stay with the rest. Make Wagner think the entire settlement is standing to fight." James frowned. "A delaying action?" "Exactly. We hold him at the canyon entrance as long as possible, then fall back through these ravines." Nathan traced the road on the map. "By the time Wagner realizes most of you are gone, you'll have a substantial head start." "And where do we go?" James asked. "If not to Riverton as planned." "El Paso," Nathan replied. "Directly to Senator Matthews. Bypass the trap we were setting and go straight to federal protection." The two older men exchanged glances, weighing the proposal. It was a significant deviation from their original plan, but the unexpected arrival of Wagner's force left them little choice. "It could work," Samuel finally acknowledged, "but whoever stays behind to delay Wagner will be in significant danger," Nathan finished for him. "I know." "I should stay," James said. "This settlement, these people, they've followed me for years. I can't abandon them now." "With all due respect," Nathan countered, "you're the only one who can identify all the evidence you've gathered against Hamilton. And Charlotte will need you in El Paso to corroborate her testimony." James seemed about to argue further when Charlotte herself entered the cabin, her expression indicating she had already heard the news. "Wagner's coming," she said without preamble. "Samuel's people are preparing defenses." "Change of plans," Nathan informed her, quickly outlining the new strategy. "You'll go with your father to El Paso directly to Senator Matthews. Samuel and I will stay behind with volunteers to delay Wagner." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "No, I won't leave you behind to die." "No one's dying, Nathan assured her, though they all knew it was far from certain. "Just buying time. Once you're clear, we'll break off and follow." "Then I'm staying too," Charlotte insisted. "I can shoot, and I know Wagner's methods better than most." "Charlotte," James interjected, his voice gentle but firm, "if you stay, Wagner wins. He gets you back, which is exactly what he wants. Our best chance, everyone's best chance, is for you to reach Senator Matthews with the evidence we've gathered." She looked from her father to Nathan, clearly torn between the logic of the plan and her reluctance to abandon those who would stay to fight. "You promised," she said to Nathan, her voice low and intense. "You promised we would see this through together." "And we will," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "This isn't the end, Charlotte. It's just a change in tactics." For a long moment she seemed unconvinced. Then with visible reluctance she nodded. 2 days, she said. If you haven't joined us in El Paso in 2 days, I'm coming back for you." Nathan didn't argue, knowing it would be futile. Instead, he turned to Samuel. "How many fighters can you spare to go with them?" "5, maybe 6, Samuel replied. "That leaves us with about the same to hold the canyon." "Enough," Nathan decided. "If we position ourselves well, use the terrain to our advantage." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as the settlement divided its resources and personnel. Those heading east packed essential supplies and documents, while those staying behind prepared defensive positions at the canyon entrance. As the eastern group prepared to depart, Nathan found Charlotte securing her father's journals and evidence in a saddlebag. She worked with efficient movements, her face set in determined lines. "Charlotte," he said softly, approaching her. "It's time." She turned to face him, her expression a complex mixture of fear or resolve and something deeper that Nathan hesitated to name. "This isn't right," she said, "leaving you and Samuel to face Wagner alone." "Not alone, we have good men, good positions." He attempted a reassuring smile. "And Wagner's never been known for his tactical brilliance. We'll hold him long enough for you to get clear, then disengage." Charlotte studied his face, perhaps searching for deception. "Promise me you'll be careful, that you'll follow as soon as you can." "I promise." She held his gaze a moment longer, then did something unexpected. She leaned forward and kissed him briefly, a gesture both tender and fierce. "For luck," she said as she pulled away, "and as a reminder that you have a reason to keep that promise." Before Nathan could respond, she mounted her horse and joined the group assembling for departure. James Morgan nodded once to Nathan, a gesture of respect and understanding between men who recognized the gravity of their situation. Nathan watched as they rode out, Charlotte glancing back once before the eastern trail took them out of sight. Something tightened in his chest at her departure. Concern for her safety, yes, but also a more personal regret at their separation. There was no time to dwell on it, however. Samuel approached, rifle in hand, his expression grim but determined. "Wagner's advanced scouts have been spotted entering the lower canyon," he reported. "Main force not far behind." Nathan checked his weapons one last time, revolver, rifle, knife, each a familiar weight, each a tool he had hoped never to use in earnest again. "Then let's go welcome them properly," he said, turning toward the canyon entrance where their small force awaited. As they moved into position, Nathan found himself thinking of Charlotte's kiss. Unexpected, unasked for, but carrying a promise of something beyond the immediate danger. A future, perhaps, if they both survived the coming hours. It was a thought he put aside as Wagner's men appeared at the mouth of the canyon. Now was not the time for dreams or possibilities. Now was the time for focus, for the cold calculations of survival. "Ready rifles," Samuel ordered quietly, and the defenders raised their weapons as one. The battle for New Green Valley, and perhaps for the soul of the territory itself, was about to begin. The first shots echoed through the canyon like thunder, ricocheting off stone walls and sending birds scattering from the trees. Nathan ducked behind a boulder as bullets chipped away at the rock around him, the familiar surge of battle awareness sharpening his senses. Their position was good. High ground overlooking the canyon entrance, with natural stone formations providing cover. Wagner's men were forced to advance in the open, making them easy targets for the defenders' rifles. "Hold your fire until they're in range," Samuel called to his men. "Make every shot count." Nathan sighted down his rifle at the advancing force. He counted at least 15 riders, Wagner himself leading them with the confidence of a man unused to defeat. The odds were poor, worse than Nathan had initially estimated, but their purpose wasn't victory. It was delay. When the attackers reached the narrowest part of the canyon, Samuel gave the signal. 7 rifles fired in unison, the coordinated volley dropping 3 of Wagner's men instantly and sending the others scrambling for whatever meager cover they could find. "That got their attention," Samuel remarked grimly. Nathan nodded, already reloading. "They'll be more cautious now. That works in our favor." The battle settled into a tense stalemate. Wagner's men pinned down at the canyon entrance, the defenders secure in their elevated positions. Occasional shots were exchanged, but neither side could gain a decisive advantage. Through his field glass, Nathan observed Wagner conferring with his lieutenants, gesturing toward the canyon walls. They were looking for another way, in which meant they'd soon discover there was one. The same path Nathan and the others had used to set their ambush. "They're going to try flanking us," he told Samuel, "sending men up the eastern slope." Samuel squinted toward the indicated position. "That path's a tough climb. Slow going, especially under fire. Still, we should prepare. It's what I do in their position." Samuel nodded, dispatching 2 of his men to watch the eastern approach. No sooner had they taken up their new positions than a shout came from below. "Hawkins," Wagner's voice echoed through the canyon. "I know you're up there." Nathan exchanged glances with Samuel, who shrugged. No harm in talking if it bought more time for Charlotte and the others to escape. I hear you, Wagner, Nathan called back, keeping his position concealed. You're outgunned and surrounded. Surrender the girl and the rest of you can ride out of here alive. Nathan almost laughed at the transparent lie. Generous offer, but Charlotte Morgan isn't here. She's beyond your reach now. A pause, then Wagner's voice again, harder this time. I don't believe you, Hawkins, but it doesn't matter. The commander wants her found, and he wants you dead. Makes no difference to me what order those events occur in. Your commander, did Nathan reply, deliberately emphasizing the title. Judge Hamilton, you mean? The sudden silence from below confirmed the impact of his words. Nathan had gambled that Wagner's men might not all know the identity of their mysterious leader. The shocked murmurs that followed suggested he'd been right. You're a dead man, Hawkins. Wagner finally responded, rage evident in his tone. You and everyone with you. The conversation had served its purpose, creating confusion in Wagner's ranks and buying precious minutes for Charlotte's group. Now the real fight would begin. It came sooner than expected. A barrage of gunfire erupted from multiple positions, heavier than before. Under its cover, a group of Wagner's men made a dash for the base of the canyon wall where the climbing path began. Eastern slope, Samuel shouted, directing his men's fire toward the new threat. Nathan aimed carefully, dropping 2 of the climbers before they could reach cover. But others had made it to the path and were beginning their ascent using the irregular terrain for protection. They're committing to the flanking move, Nathan observed. Time for our fallback. Samuel nodded, giving the prearranged signal. Half their small force began retreating toward their secondary position deeper in the canyon, while the others maintained covering fire. The maneuver was executed smoothly, a testament to the Green Valley survivors' discipline. But as Nathan provided cover for the last man to fall back, a bullet found its mark, grazing his already wounded arm. The impact spun him sideways, nearly causing him to lose his footing on the narrow ledge. Samuel was there instantly, steadying him. How bad? I'll live, Nathan grunted, pressing a hand to the fresh wound. Same arm as before, starting to take it personally. They retreated to their new position, a narrow ravine that further constrained the attackers' approach. But their advantage was diminishing. Wagner's men had gained the high ground on the eastern slope and were working their way toward the defenders' flank. How long do you think Charlotte's group needs? Samuel asked, as they reloaded behind a fallen tree. Nathan calculated distances and travel times. If they maintain a good pace, 3 hours to clear the mountains. Maybe 4. Samuel checked his pocket watch. We've held for nearly 1, not bad odds. Let's improve them. Nathan suggested, nodding toward a stack of dynamite, part of their prepared defenses. That eastern slope looks unstable. One good blast might bring enough down to block their flanking route. Samuel grinned, the expression incongruous on his weather-beaten face. I like how you think, Hawkins. They worked quickly, positioning the charges while their companions maintained suppressing fire. The eastern slope was indeed vulnerable, layers of loose shale and weathered stone that needed only a nudge to come crashing down. Fire in the hole, Samuel called as they retreated to safety, igniting the long fuse. The explosion was magnificent, a thunderous roar followed by the groan of shifting earth as half the slope collapsed, sending a cloud of dust billowing through the canyon. When it cleared, the eastern path was gone, buried under tons of rock and debris. Along with it, at least 4 of Wagner's men who hadn't retreated in time. That ought to slow them down, Samuel remarked with grim satisfaction. Nathan nodded, though he knew it was only a temporary advantage. Wagner had men to spare, and now he was angry. The next push would be even more determined. It came within the hour, a frontal assault supported by rifle fire from the remaining high positions. Wagner was done with caution, committing his forces to a direct approach that would overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. Fall back to position 3, Samuel ordered as bullets splintered the logs around them. Their third defensive line was their last, a narrow gap between towering rock walls where 3 men could hold off dozens, at least for a time. Beyond it lay the path Charlotte's group had taken east, and they couldn't allow Wagner's men to discover it. The retreat was more chaotic this time, the pressure from Wagner's advancing force making it impossible to maintain the same orderly withdrawal. One of Samuel's men fell shot through the chest before Nathan could pull him to cover. Damn it, Samuel muttered, checking the fallen man and finding no pulse. That's Miller. Good man. Has had a wife and daughter in the settlement. Nathan nodded grimly, another name added to the ledger of accounts that would eventually come due, if they survived long enough to collect. They reached the final position with 5 men remaining of their original 7. Not terrible odds given the circumstances, but the day was still young and Wagner showed no signs of breaking off the attack. How much ammunition do we have? Nathan asked as they established their new firing positions. Samuel conferred briefly with his men. Maybe 100 rounds between us. Not enough if this turns into a lengthy siege. It won't, Nathan assured him. When Wagner realizes we're down to our last position, he'll rush us. Try to overwhelm us before dark. And our plan then? Nathan surveyed their position. The narrow gap opened onto a small plateau beyond which lay the Eastern Trail. If they could hold until nightfall, they might slip away in the darkness. But Wagner was unlikely to give them that much time. We hold as long as we can, Nathan said simply. Then we improvise. Samuel's laugh was short and without humor. Improvise, I like that. Sounds better than die fighting. Before Nathan could respond, a familiar voice called from beyond their defensive line. Hawkins right, I'm coming in to talk, alone and unarmed. Nathan and Samuel exchanged surprised glances. Is that Parker? Nathan confirmed, recognizing his former colleague's voice. Thomas Parker. Can we trust him? Samuel asked, rifle trained on the canyon entrance. Not as far as I could throw him, Nathan replied. But let's hear what he has to say. Might learn something useful. He raised his voice. Come ahead, Parker. Slowly, hands where we can see them. Parker emerged from behind a boulder. Hands indeed raised his expression, a mixture of caution and something else. Urgency, perhaps. He walked with his characteristic slight limp, unarmed, as promised. That's far enough, Nathan called, when Parker was about 20 yards from their position. Say your piece. Parker stopped lowering his hands but keeping them visible. Wagner's bringing in reinforcements from Riverton. Another 20 men at least. They'll be here within the hour. And you're sharing this out of the goodness of your heart. Nathan's tone made it clear what he thought of that possibility. Self-preservation, Hawkins. Always my primary motivation. Parker's smile was thin. Wagner's lost control. The ambush, the girl escaping again. Judge Hamilton's name being shouted across the canyon. The commander is not pleased. So Hamilton is the commander, Samuel interjected. Parker glanced at him, then back to Nathan. Yes, has been for 15 years. Built this whole operation from nothing. The railroad security contracts, the mining rights, the experiments. And you've been his man all along, Nathan said, the pieces falling more firmly into place. Even at Pinkerton. I've been whoever's man paid best, Parker corrected. Pinkerton, then Wagner, then Hamilton directly. It's just business, Hawkins. Nothing personal. Catherine was personal, Nathan replied, his voice dangerously quiet. A flicker of genuine regret crossed Parker's face. That wasn't supposed to happen. She was just supposed to get sick enough to distract you from the case. The dosage was wrong. The casual admission hit Nathan like a physical blow. All these years he'd suspected Parker's involvement in Catherine's death, but hearing it confirmed, and so dispassionately, ignited a rage that threatened to consume his careful control. Give me one reason I shouldn't shoot you where you stand, he said, raising his rifle. Because I can help you get to Hamilton, Parker replied quickly, and because Wagner's going to kill me the moment I'm no longer useful. I need a way out, Hawkins. You need information and access. We can help each other. Nathan's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. One pressure, one moment, and the man who had helped murder Catherine would be gone. Justice of a sort, immediate and final. But Charlotte's face appeared in his mind. Her determination to expose the entire organization to bring true justice, not just for herself or for Nathan, but for all of Hamilton's victims. Killing Parker might satisfy Nathan's personal vendetta, but it wouldn't serve the larger cause. What exactly are you offering? He asked, lowering the rifle slightly. A way out of this canyon for starters, Parker said, visibly relieved. There's a trail on the western ridge that Wagner doesn't know about. It'll take you to the river where you can find boats to take you downstream. And in return, take me with you to wherever the girl and her father went. I have information they'll need, documents, names, locations of other facilities. Parker's expression hardened. And I want immunity when this all comes out. A new identity, a fresh start, somewhere far from Texas. Samuel snorted. Pretty steep price for a traitor. A traitor with valuable intelligence, Parker countered. Information that could bring down not just Hamilton, but half the territorial government. Nathan studied the man who had once been his colleague, trying to gauge his sincerity. Parker had always been a survivor, shifting allegiances as circumstances required. His offer could be genuine, or it could be Wagner's latest ploy to locate Charlotte. How do we know this isn't a trap, Nathan demanded, that you won't lead Wagner right to us? Because Wagner wants me dead almost as much as he wants you, Parker replied. I've known too much for too long. Hamilton's been keeping me close, but after today's disaster, he shook his head. My usefulness is at an end. It's only a matter of time. Something in his tone rang true. The desperation of a man who had played too many sides and finally found himself without protection. If you're lying, Nathan said quietly, I'll kill you myself. Parker nodded, accepting the terms. Fair enough. But we need to move now before those reinforcements arrive. Samuel pulled Nathan aside, keeping his voice low. Can we trust him? No, Nathan replied honestly, but we're running out of options. And if he does have information about Hamilton's operation, worth the risk, Samuel concluded. But we keep him under close watch. They quickly explained the situation to the remaining defenders, who received the news with understandable skepticism. But as Parker had pointed out, their choices were limited. With Wagner's reinforcements approaching, staying meant certain death. Lead the way, Nathan instructed Parker, making it clear with his tone and expression that the slightest hint of betrayal would be fatal. Parker nodded, understanding the unspoken threat. This way, and we need to hurry. The Western Trail was exactly where Parker had said it would be, a narrow, treacherous path that wound down through a series of switchbacks into the river below. It was slow going, especially with one of Samuel's men nursing a leg wound, but they reached the water's edge without incident. Just as Parker had promised, a small dock extended into the river, with several rowboats secured to it. The presence of boats this far from any settlement seemed suspicious, but Parker offered a simple explanation. Hamilton's organization uses the river to transport certain products, he said, things too sensitive for the railroad. These boats are for emergencies or supply runs. Convenient, Nathan remarked, still wary of a trap. I've been planning my exit strategy for months, Parker replied. Just never thought I'd be using it with you. They commandeered two of the boats, distributing their remaining ammunition and supplies. The river flowed east, the same direction Charlotte's group had taken toward El Paso. With luck, they might catch up to them before they reached the city. As they pushed off from the dock, the sound of gunfire echoed from the canyon above. Wagner's men discovering their abandoned position, perhaps, or engaging with the reinforcements from Riverton. Either way, the distraction worked in their favor, allowing them to slip downstream unnoticed. The current was swift, carrying them away from the mountains and into the open country beyond. Samuel and two of his men took the lead boat while Nathan kept Parker with him in the second, unwilling to let the man out of his sight. You still don't trust me, Parker observed as they navigated a gentle bend in the river. Trust is earned, Nathan replied simply. So far you have kept us alive. That buys you the benefit of the doubt, nothing more. Parker accepted this with a nod. For a time they rowed in silence, each man absorbed in his own thoughts. The afternoon sun beat down on the water, the landscape gradually shifting from rocky highlands to rolling plains dotted with mesquite and cacti. How did you get involved with Hamilton? Nathan finally asked, more to gauge Parker's willingness to share information than out of genuine curiosity. Parker was quiet for so long that Nathan thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was reflective, almost distant. It was after that border case, the one with the Mexican farmers being forced off their land. Remember? Nathan nodded. It had been one of their early assignments together at Pinkerton, investigating allegations that a railroad security force was terrorizing farming communities to clear land for a new line. We found evidence, Parker continued, enough to prosecute half a dozen men, including the regional security chief. But when we presented it to the local authorities, nothing happened, Nathan finished, recalling his frustration. Case dismissed for insufficient evidence. That night I was approached by a man representing Judge Hamilton. Said the judge was impressed by my thoroughness, wanted to offer me a position as a private investigator for the territorial court. Parker's laugh was hollow. Twice my Pinkerton salary plus bonuses for special assignments. It seemed legitimate at first. Until it wasn't. Until it wasn't, Parker agreed. By the time I realized what Hamilton was really doing, the scope of his operation, I was already implicated. Small steps, Hawkins. That's how it happens. Small compromises that lead to bigger ones until one day you realize you've crossed lines you never thought you would. There was genuine regret in his voice, but Nathan felt little sympathy. Every man made choices, and Parker had made his with open eyes. And Catherine, he asked the question that had haunted him for 5 years. Was that one of your small compromises? Parker's gaze dropped to the water. That was different. I was told to ensure you were distracted during the final days before Wagner's trial. The substance was supposed to make her ill enough to require your attention, but not life-threatening. But it killed her. The dosage was wrong, Parker repeated his earlier explanation. Or her reaction was stronger than anticipated. I don't know. But I never intended. He trailed off, perhaps realizing the futility of his justification. Nathan's hands tightened on the oars, knuckles white with suppressed rage. You poisoned my wife as a distraction. Whether you meant to kill her or not doesn't matter. I know, Parker said quietly, and I've lived with that knowledge every day since. It's why I'm here now, Hawkins. It won't bring Catherine back, but maybe I can help stop Hamilton before he destroys more lives. Nathan studied the man across from him. Older now, grayer, the confident Pinkerton agent replaced by someone worn down by years of compromise and regret. Was redemption possible for such a man? Nathan wasn't sure. But Parker's knowledge of Hamilton's operation might prove invaluable regardless of his motivations. "Tell me about Hamilton," he said after a moment. "Everything you know." Parker seemed relieved at the change of subject. Warren Lawrence Hamilton, appointed to the territorial bench 15 years ago, respected jurist pillar of the community, friend to governors and senators alike. His tone grew darker. And the architect of a criminal enterprise that spans half the Southwest. The experiments at the mine, Nathan prompted. What were they really about? Developing substances that could kill without detection or incapacitate without visible symptoms. Poisons that mimic natural diseases. Drugs that could render victims compliant or affect their memories. Parker shook his head. Hamilton has clients beyond the territory. Government agencies, foreign interests, private parties with specific needs. And the women? Why them specifically test subjects? Parker replied, his clinical tone failing to mask the horror of his words. People no one would miss. Prostitutes, transients, immigrants. Though sometimes there were special cases. People who knew too much or who had specific characteristics Hamilton's clients wanted tested. Like Charlotte Morgan, Nathan surmised. Exactly. A journalist investigating the disappearances was too valuable to simply eliminate. Hamilton wanted to understand how much she knew, who she'd told, whether she could be repurposed. The casual barbarity of it all, human lives reduced to experimental data, reinforced Nathan's determination to bring Hamilton to justice, not just for Catherine, but for all those who had suffered under the judge's systematic cruelty. And Wagner, where does he fit in all this? Hamilton's enforcer, Parker explained. Handles the security, the procurement of subjects, the disposal of problems. He was military before the war, specialized in interrogation techniques. Hamilton found him useful. As Parker continued detailing Hamilton's operation, Nathan's understanding of what they were facing grew clearer and more daunting. This wasn't merely a corrupt judge or a criminal enterprise. It was an institution embedded within the legitimate power structures of the territory, protected by its connections and its carefully maintained facade of respectability. One man can't bring this down, Nathan observed when Parker had finished. Not even with evidence. There are too many people involved, too many with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. That's why we need the senator, Parker replied. Matthews is powerful enough to force a federal investigation, especially with witnesses and documentation. He's been looking for a way to break the railroad's stranglehold on the territorial government for years. Nathan nodded slowly. The plan Charlotte and James had devised, reaching Senator Matthews with their evidence, remained their best hope. If they could reunite with them before they reached El Paso. How far to the junction where we might intercept Charlotte's group? He asked Samuel, who had brought his boat alongside. Samuel consulted a small map he carried. River bends south about 10 miles downstream. If we maintain this pace, we should reach it by nightfall. From there, it's maybe another 15 miles overland to the main trail to El Paso. And Charlotte's group, on horseback moving cautiously with the injured women, Samuel calculated. They might reach the same point by tomorrow afternoon. If we push on through the night, we could catch them before they reach the city. Nathan nodded, satisfied. Despite the day's chaos and danger, they were still on track, still in the fight. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the water, Nathan found himself thinking of Charlotte, her determination, her resilience, and the kiss she had given him before they parted. For luck, she had said, and as a reminder that he had a reason to keep his promise to return. He intended to honor that promise, whatever obstacles Hamilton and Wagner might place in his path. They reached the river junction as darkness fell, the landscape transformed by shadow and starlight. Here the water divided, one branch continuing east, while the other curved south toward the Rio Grande. We leave the boats here, Samuel decided after consulting his map. The southern trail runs parallel to the river for several miles before turning east toward El Paso. They secured the boats and divided their remaining supplies, maintaining a careful watch on Parker. Though he had proven useful thus far, none of them were ready to trust him completely. The night march was grueling, especially for the wounded man, but they maintained a steady pace driven by the knowledge that Charlotte's group, and the evidence they carried, remained vulnerable until they reached Senator Matthews. Dawn found them on a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of desert, the southern trail visible as a thin line winding through the scrub land below. Samuel estimated they had covered nearly 10 miles since leaving the river. If we maintain this pace, we should intersect Charlotte's route by mid-afternoon, he said, passing a canteen to Nathan. Nathan nodded, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Wagner would not have given up so easily, especially with Hamilton's authority behind him. The attack at the canyon had been costly, but Wagner had resources to spare. "We should keep moving," he said, returning the canteen. "Cover as much ground as possible before the heat becomes unbearable." They had just resumed their march when Parker, who had been scouting slightly ahead, signaled for them to stop. Nathan joined him at the crest of a small rise, following his gaze to a dust cloud in the distance. "Riders," Parker said grimly. "At least a dozen moving fast along the southern trail." Nathan studied the approaching group through his field glass. "Not Charlotte's group. They're coming from the east heading west." "Wagner," or Samuel suggested, joining us. "Possibly, or Hamilton's men from El Paso." Parker's expression was troubled. "Either way, they're on an intercept course with the trail from Green Valley. If Charlotte's group maintains their current route," he didn't need to finish the thought. "Charlotte, James, and their companions would ride directly into an ambush, unaware of the danger until it was too late. We need to warn them." Nathan said, already calculating distances and times. "How far to where their trail joins the southern route?" Samuel consulted his map. "About 5 miles southeast, but on foot we can't reach it before those riders." "Then we don't go on foot." Nathan turned to Parker. "You said Hamilton's organization uses the river for transport. Are there outposts along this section? Places where supplies or personnel might be stationed?" Parker nodded slowly, understanding Nathan's line of thought. "There's a way station about 2 miles downriver. Small operation, usually just 2 or 3 men. They'd have horses." "Then that's our first objective," Nathan decided. "We acquire mounts, then ride to intercept Charlotte before she reaches the junction." The way station was exactly as Parker had described. A small compound consisting of a cabin, a corral with half a dozen horses, and a dock extending into the river. 2 men were visible, one tending the horses, while the other loaded supplies onto a small boat. "Hamilton's men," Parker confirmed as they observed from a concealed position, "probably preparing for a shipment from the mine." Nathan formulated a simple plan. Samuel and his men would create a distraction upriver, drawing the attention of the station guards, while Nathan and Parker approached from behind to secure the horses. The plan worked flawlessly. At the sound of Samuel's men firing their rifles into the air from a position upriver, both guards grabbed weapons and ran to investigate, leaving the station momentarily unattended. Nathan and Parker moved quickly, leading 5 horses from the corral and bringing them to where Samuel and the others waited. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding hard toward the trail junction, leaving the confused guards firing blindly into the brush behind them. They rode as if demons pursued them, pushing the horses to their limits across the unforgiving terrain. Nathan's wounded arm throbbed with each hoofbeat, but he ignored the pain, focused entirely on reaching Charlotte before Wagner's men. As they approached the junction, Samuel pointed to fresh tracks in the sandy soil. "Cavalry formation, disciplined riders, not Wagner's usual men." "Hamilton's private security," Parker suggested. "Former military, most of them, more dangerous than Wagner's thugs." Nathan nodded grimly. The stakes had just risen again. If Hamilton had committed his elite forces to intercepting Charlotte, he must be truly desperate to recover the evidence she carried. They followed the tracks east toward where the Green Valley Trail would join the main route. The sun climbed higher, the heat becoming oppressive, but they maintained their pace, driven by the growing sense of urgency. It was Parker who spotted them first, a group of riders moving slowly along the trail ahead, perhaps 2 miles distant. Through his field glass, Nathan confirmed it was Charlotte's group. He recognized James Morgan's distinctive white horse, and beside him, Charlotte's smaller mount. "They don't see the danger," Samuel observed, pointing to a ridge where dust betrayed the presence of hidden riders. "Hamilton's men are waiting for them to reach that narrow pass." Nathan calculated quickly. "We can't reach them before they enter the pass, but we can create a diversion, draw Hamilton's men out of position." The plan was hastily assembled but sound. Samuel and his men would circle wide to the north, then attack the ambush position from the flank, creating confusion. Meanwhile, Nathan and Parker would ride directly to Charlotte's group, warning them and providing escort through the dangerous section. "If anything goes wrong," Nathan told Parker as they prepared to separate, "your priority is getting Charlotte and the evidence to Senator Matthews. Whatever happens to the rest of us." Parker nodded, understanding. "And if we make it through, then maybe you'll have begun to balance the scales." Nathan replied, his expression making it clear that redemption would not come easily, if at all. They parted ways, Samuel leading his men toward the ridge, while Nathan and Parker rode directly towards Charlotte's group. They were still a mile away when the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the ridge. Samuel's attack on the ambush position had begun. The effect was immediate. Charlotte's group halted, clearly alarmed by the sudden commotion. Through his field glass, Nathan saw James organizing a defensive formation, The women and wounded clustered in the center. They think they're under attack, Parker observed. We need to reach them before they scatter. Nathan urged his horse to greater speed, closing the distance rapidly. As they approached, he saw Charlotte raise a rifle, taking aim at what she perceived as new threats. "Charlotte," he called, waving his hat above his head. "It's Nathan. Don't shoot." Recognition dawned on her face, followed by obvious relief. She lowered the rifle, pointing toward them and speaking urgently to her father. As Nathan and Parker reached the group, the sound of gunfire from the ridge intensified. Samuel's diversion was working, drawing Hamilton's men into a firefight and away from their ambush positions. "Nathan," Charlotte's voice held a mixture of relief and confusion. "What's happening?" "We heard shooting." "Ambush," Nathan explained quickly, reining in beside her. "Hamilton's men were waiting for you at the pass. Samuel and his people are creating a diversion, but we need to move now while they're distracted." James Morgan's gaze moved past Nathan to Parker, his expression hardening. "What's he doing here?" "He's with us," Nathan replied, though the claim felt strange on his tongue. "He helped us escape Wagner at the canyon. Has information about Hamilton's operation." James clearly wasn't satisfied, but the urgency of their situation prevented further discussion. "Which way?" he asked, accepting the immediate necessity of cooperation. Nathan pointed south. "Away from the fighting. We can circle back to the El Paso road once we're clear." They set off immediately, the rescued women and wounded riding double with stronger members of the group. The sound of gunfire continued behind them, but grew fainter as they put distance between themselves and the ridge. Charlotte maneuvered her horse alongside Nathan's as they rode. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon," she said, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear. "Or him." She nodded toward Parker, riding a few yards ahead. "Circumstances changed," Nathan replied. "Wagner brought in reinforcements. We had to abandon the canyon." He didn't mention the man they'd lost. There would be time for that accounting later. "Parker provided an escape route in exchange for bringing him to you and your father. Can he be trusted?" Nathan considered the question carefully. "No, but his information might be valuable, and right now his interests align with ours. Survival and bringing down Hamilton." Charlotte studied Parker's back for a moment, then returned her attention to Nathan. "You're wounded again," she observed, nodding toward the bloodstain on his sleeve. "It's nothing. Same arm as before." Her expression suggested she didn't believe his dismissal, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she asked, "What happened after we left?" Nathan gave her a concise account of the canyon battle, Parker's arrival, their escape down the river, and the discovery of Hamilton's men preparing to ambush her group. Throughout his explanation, Charlotte listened intently, her expression revealing both concern and determination. "And Samuel," she asked when he had finished, "will he and his men be able to escape the ridge?" "Samuel's resourceful. They'll break off the engagement once we're clear, find their own way to El Paso." Nathan hoped his confidence was justified. Samuel and his men had known the risks of their diversion, had accepted them willingly to protect Charlotte and the evidence she carried. They maintained a steady pace southward for several miles before turning east again, rejoining the El Paso road well beyond the ambush point. By Nathan's estimation, they were now less than a day's ride from the city where Senator Matthews awaited. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, James called a halt in a small arroyo that offered both water and defensible positions. The women from the mine were exhausted, as were the horses, and even the most resilient among them needed rest before the final push to El Paso. While the others established camp, James pulled Nathan and Parker aside for a council of war. "We need to consider our approach carefully," he began without preamble. "Hamilton will have men watching all the main routes into El Paso. And with both Wagner and his own security force hunting us, our margin for error is non-existent." Nathan nodded his agreement. "Senator Matthews is expecting you tomorrow." "Yes, he's staying at the Grand Hotel under an assumed name. Has federal marshals with him, ostensibly as part of an investigation into railroad land grants." James glanced at Parker. "Can Hamilton reach him there? Influence the marshals somehow?" Parker considered the question. "Possibly. Hamilton has connections throughout the territory, including in federal law enforcement. But Matthews is a powerful man in his own right, with his own loyalties. And a public figure is harder to touch than an anonymous witness. We need to get the evidence to Matthews without Hamilton's knowledge," Nathan concluded. "Once it's in the senator's hands with federal marshals as witnesses, it becomes much harder for Hamilton to suppress." "The evidence is secure," James assured him, patting a saddlebag that hadn't left his side since their departure from Green Valley. "Everything we've gathered over 15 years. Witness statements, financial records, correspondence. Enough to bring down Hamilton and half the territorial government with him. And my testimony," Charlotte added, joining their circle. "I've documented everything I saw at the mine, everything I experienced. Names, dates, descriptions of the experiments. Nathan felt a surge of admiration for her resilience. Where many would have tried to forget such horrors, Charlotte had cataloged them, transforming her trauma into evidence for justice. "There's more," Parker interjected. "Information I can provide about Hamilton's operation. Clients' contacts facilities beyond the mine. Things even you don't know, Morgan." James regarded Parker with undisguised suspicion. "And why would you betray your employer so thoroughly? What's your angle?" "Survival," Parker replied simply. "Hamilton knows I've outlived my usefulness. I'm a liability now, just like Wagner. The moment this crisis passes, we both become expendable." "So it's self-preservation," James said, his tone making it clear what he thought of such motivation. "Partly," Parker acknowledged. "But also," he glanced at Nathan, "let's call it a belated attack of conscience." James clearly wasn't convinced, but he was practical enough to recognize the value of Parker's information. "We'll see what the senator makes of your testimony. For now, let's focus on reaching him alive." They developed a plan for their final approach to El Paso. Instead of taking the main road, they would split into 3 groups entering the city from different directions to reduce the chances of all being intercepted. Charlotte would travel with Nathan James with the rescued women and 2 of his most trusted men, and Parker with the remaining Green Valley survivors. "We rendezvous at the Grand Hotel at noon tomorrow," James concluded. "Anyone who doesn't arrive by 2 assumes the others have reached the senator and proceeds accordingly." With the plans settled, they dispersed to their respective tasks, preparing meals, tending wounds, setting watches for the night. Nathan found a quiet spot by the small stream that ran through the arroyo, cleaning his wounded arm as best he could with the limited supplies available. Charlotte joined him carrying a small medical kit. "Let me," she said, kneeling beside him. "I've had practice." Nathan didn't resist as she carefully removed the makeshift bandage, cleaned the wound with water and whiskey, then applied a fresh dressing. Her touch was gentle but confident, reminding him that she was the daughter of a nurse. "It's not as bad as it looks," she observed. "Clean through the muscle, no bone damage. Still, you should have a proper doctor look at it in El Paso." "After we see the senator," Nathan agreed, flexing his arm experimentally. The pain was manageable, the bleeding stopped. He'd functioned with worse. Charlotte sat back on her heels, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You kept your promise," she said finally, "to come back." "I try to keep my word, even at considerable risk to yourself." Her smile was small but genuine, a rare quality in this territory. Nathan shrugged, uncomfortable with her implied praise. Samuel and his men took the same risks, greater ones maybe. "And Parker," she asked, her tone sharpening slightly, "where does he fit in all this?" Nathan considered the question carefully. "Parker is complicated. He's done terrible things, made choices I can't forgive." The admission of Catherine's poisoning still burned in his mind. But right now, his knowledge could be the key to bringing down Hamilton's entire organization. And if we succeed, after, Nathan hadn't thought that far ahead. Revenge had driven him for so long that the concept of after seemed almost foreign. "I suppose that depends on many things. The senator, the evidence, justice." "Justice," Charlotte repeated thoughtfully, "not vengeance." Nathan met her gaze directly. "Is there a difference?" "I think so. Vengeance is personal. It ends with satisfaction for one. Justice is broader. It repairs what can be repaired, prevents further harm, creates a foundation for after." Her insight struck Nathan deeply. For 5 years, he had pursued a personal vendetta against Wagner, never looking beyond the immediate goal of revenge for Catherine. But Charlotte's perspective offered something different, a vision where their actions served a purpose beyond personal satisfaction. "You sound like Catherine," he said softly. "She believed in justice too. Real justice, not just the kind dispensed in courtrooms." Charlotte seemed touched by the comparison. "I wish I could have known her." "She would have liked you," Nathan said, surprising himself with the certainty of it. "Your determination, your compassion, even after everything you've endured." They fell silent, the moment stretching between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Nathan found himself wondering what might come after if they survived the next day. If justice was served and Hamilton's organization dismantled, what then for a former Pinkerton detective with no agency, no family, no purpose beyond the vendetta that had driven him for years? And what for Charlotte Morgan once her story was told and her father's long quest for truth completed? "We should rest," Charlotte finally said, rising to her feet. "Tomorrow will test us all." Nathan nodded, but as she turned to go, he caught her hand. "Charlotte." She looked back, questioning. "Thank you, not just for this." He gestured to his bandaged arm. "For reminding me there's a difference between vengeance and justice." Her smile in response was like sunrise after a long night. warm, illuminating, full of promise. She squeezed his hand once, then moved away to join her father by the fire. Nathan watched her go, feeling something unfamiliar stirring within him. Hope, perhaps, or the first tentative consideration of what after might hold. They departed the arroyo before dawn, splitting into their 3 designated groups as planned. Nathan and Charlotte took the southern route, a less traveled trail that would bring them to El Paso through the Mexican settlements on the city's outskirts. The morning was clear, the air still cool from the night, as they rode side by side through the desert landscape. Charlotte had been mostly quiet since they set out, her expression suggesting she was focused on the task ahead. Reaching Senator Matthews, presenting their evidence, setting in motion the machinery of justice that would, if all went well, bring down Judge Hamilton and his entire operation. Nathan respected her concentration, maintaining a vigilant watch on their surroundings as they traveled. Hamilton's men could be anywhere, and the closer they got to El Paso, the greater the danger. It was Charlotte who broke the silence as the distant outlines of the city appeared on the horizon. "I've been thinking about what happens next," she said, her gaze still fixed ahead. "After we meet the senator, after the evidence is presented." "Assuming everything goes as planned," Nathan cautioned. "Assuming that, yes." She glanced at him. "The story needs to be told, not just in a courtroom, but to the public. People need to know what Hamilton was doing, how the territorial government was compromised, how many lives were affected." Nathan nodded, understanding her perspective as a journalist. "You'll write it." "I will," she confirmed, "but there's more to it than just an article or series. This is about changing systems that allowed someone like Hamilton to operate with impunity for 15 years. Her expression hardened. "It's about ensuring nothing like this happens again." "That's a big ambition," Nathan observed, though not dismissively. "Changing systems." "Maybe. But what's the alternative? Bring down Hamilton only to have someone else step into his place?" Charlotte shook her head. "That's not justice. That's just rearranging the problem." Again, Nathan was struck by the clarity of her vision, her ability to see beyond the immediate confrontation to the larger structures that enabled corruption and abuse. "So what's your plan?" he asked, "beyond writing the story." "Work with Senator Matthews to draft legislation, strengthen oversight of territorial governments, create protections for witnesses and whistleblowers." She spoke with growing animation, her passion evident. "Use what happened here as a catalyst for change across all the territories." "And your father, what will he do?" Charlotte's expression softened. "Find peace, I hope. He's carried this burden for 15 years, searching for the truth about my mother, gathering evidence against Hamilton. Once it's over," she paused, "I don't know. Perhaps he'll come east with me, at least for a time." Nathan nodded, understanding the complexity of such transitions. When a mission that has defined one's existence for years suddenly concludes, what remains? It was a question he would soon face himself. "And you," Charlotte asked, turning the inquiry back on him, "what will Nathan Hawkins do when this is finished?" It was the question he had been avoiding, the uncertainty that lurked beyond the immediate goal of bringing Hamilton to justice. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "Perhaps you should," Charlotte suggested gently. "There's a life beyond vengeance, Nathan, beyond the past." Before he could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approaching from behind caused them both to tense. Nathan reached for his revolver, turning in the saddle to assess the threat. Relief washed over him as he recognized the rider, one of James Morgan's men, pushing his horse hard to catch up with them. "Mr. Hawkins, Miss Morgan," the man called as he drew closer. "Thank God I found you." "What's happened?" Charlotte demanded, fear evident in her voice. "My father—" "He's fine, miss," the rider assured her, drawing his horse alongside theirs. "But there's been a development. Parker's group was intercepted at the eastern approach to the city." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Wagner?" The man shook his head. "Hamilton himself with a dozen men. They captured 2 of our people, but Parker and the others escaped. They're hiding in a Mexican village just outside the city." Charlotte exchanged a worried glance with Nathan. "If Hamilton is personally involved—" "He's desperate," Nathan concluded. "Knows his time is running out." "There's more," the rider continued. "Parker claims Hamilton is planning to leave the territory tonight, taking a private train east with all his records and assets." The implications were immediately clear. If Hamilton escaped with his documentation, they might never be able to prove the full extent of his crimes. The case against him would be significantly weakened, perhaps to the point of collapse. "We need to inform my father and the senator," Charlotte said urgently. "Change our approach." Nathan nodded in agreement. "Where is James now?" "Already in the city, miss, at the Grand Hotel with Senator Matthews. He sent me to find you, bring you directly there." The plan was rapidly evolving, their carefully structured approach, giving way to the urgent reality of Hamilton's impending flight. If they were to stop him, it would have to be tonight before he could board that train and vanish beyond their reach. "Lead the way," Nathan instructed the rider, "and pray we're not too late." As they urged their horses toward El Paso, Nathan found himself reflecting on Charlotte's question about after. The future she had described, of systemic change of justice beyond vengeance, was compelling. But first they had to survive the immediate challenge, had to stop Hamilton before he escaped with his secrets and his wealth, leaving behind a legacy of unpunished crimes and unanswered questions. The city grew larger on the horizon, its buildings taking shape against the afternoon sky. Somewhere within those streets, Senator Matthews waited with the power to bring Hamilton to justice. And somewhere else, Hamilton himself prepared for flight, perhaps already aware that his carefully constructed empire was crumbling. The final confrontation was approaching, not just between individuals, but between opposing visions of what the territory could be. A corrupt fiefdom ruled by money and influence, or a place where justice might actually mean something more than words on paper. Nathan glanced at Charlotte riding determinedly beside him and made a silent promise, not just to her or to Catherine's memory, but to himself. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, this would end. One way or another, Judge Lawrence Hamilton would answer for his crimes. And perhaps then, in the aftermath, there might indeed be space to consider what came next. A future not defined by vengeance or the ghosts of the past, but by something new. Something with room for hope, for justice, for the possibility that Charlotte Morgan had so unexpectedly brought back into his life. But first they had to reach the Grand Hotel, had to combine their evidence with James Morgan's and Parker's testimony, had to convince Senator Matthews to act immediately before Hamilton's train carried him beyond their reach. The city of El Paso awaited, and with it the final act of a drama 15 years in the making. Nathan checked his revolver, adjusted his grip on the reins, and rode toward whatever fate awaited them all.